Hello curious people, today I am here to help you. I know you are using this video to help you fall asleep. So before you like this video and subscribe to the channel, tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Make yourself comfortable now. I stepped into the stories. I'm currently writing this from under a bridge. It's a couple of hours until dawn, and the streets are dead silent. I'm fairly sure I'd hear the sirens when they come for me. I'm hoping that means I have time. I am under no false illusions. I know barely any of you will believe me, and I don't blame you. I'm a scientist, a pragmatist. I've always believed in hard evidence, in the tangible and irrefutable. Ghost stories were for children, and superstitions merely. These same stories persisted into adulthood. So I can imagine what it's like to be you, possibly curled up in a bed somewhere in the dark, scrolling through a strange story written by some distant stranger you have no cause to believe. I've been on your side many a time. But if there's a chance, just a chance, that one of you may have experienced something similar, or have minds malleable enough to accept what I previously thought impossible, then I feel it's important I share my story. For context, I have go as far back as my grandmother, Sylvia. I don't remember much about her. Most of what I know comes from old photographs and whispered conversations I wasn't supposed to hear. Sylvia grew up in a small nowhere Bible town called Driftwood, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business, and the church bells regulate daily life more reliably than any clock. Her parents, my great-grandparents, were Old Testament types who saw sin lurking behind every corner and liked their early morning coffee with the smell of brimstone. They raised Sylvia to fear God with such intensity that she'd spend hours kneeling on the hardwood floor, praying for forgiveness if she so much as took an extra biscuit from the cupboard. There's an old sepia photograph of her I remember Mum kept around for a while. Small and dark-featured, with a gaunt little face and lank, unkempt hair. She wore a strange, oversized robe that I later learned was the standard uniform given to the members of the New Eden community. If it's not immediately apparent from the creepy-ass name, yes, it's a cult. You might even remember them by the moniker they later adopted after all the infamy died out. They were pretty notorious in the 1980s when that Venezuelan singer, Solimar Valencia, joined their ranks. You may know them now as the Brides of Christendom. A questionable rebrand, but it worked. You know the ones. They stand outside Targets and Costco's, wearing those robes that look like bohemian bridal gowns, passing out pamphlets and targeting families with any young girls in tow. And that's now with all the public scrutiny and police investigations. Imagine how bad it was when they were simply known as the New Eden community. A bunch of nutjobs, sure, but harmless and secular and best left alone. This is the world my grandmother grew up in. Now I'm not sure what happened exactly, though I've done a fair bit of digging since it started, but my grandmother left New Eden when she was roughly 15. She was taken into a halfway house for underaged and disgraced young mothers where she birthed my mother. As far as I'm aware, Sylvia never told my mother who her father was. He must have been a horrible person, because whenever the question was asked, Sylvia would near about lose her mind. She'd get nasty, violent, would force my mother to kneel on sun-baked gravel for the better part of 8 hours whenever she asked the question. And when my mother would hobble back inside, knees bloody and face salty with dried tears, Sylvia would finish off the punishment with 48 hours of enforced starvation. For Sylvia, the more ribs you could see on a person, the more penitent they were. It's no wonder my mother cut ties as soon as she could. She would tell me that Sylvia would wildly pivot between a loving, delicate woman scared by New Eden to a bitter, abusive tormentor, desperate to pass on some of that same trauma to her own daughter. My mother moved states, got a job, and enrolled in night classes. She worked her ass off and ended up in a junior position at a civil law firm. That's where she met my dad, a paralegal. They fell in love, got married, and soon after, Mom got pregnant with me. The pregnancy nearly killed her. It started with seemingly normal symptoms, a persistent low-grade fever that doctors attributed to a mild chronic infection. She bruised easily, so they pumped her full of vitamins and iron supplements. The tinnitus and heightened sensitivity to smells were written off as typical pregnancy symptoms. But then things started getting weird. My mother developed an overwhelming craving for raw meat. Not just any meat. It had to be fresh, barely touched by refrigeration. My dad would find her in the kitchen at night, standing in the dark, tearing into raw sirloin with her bare hands and teeth. She'd sob afterward, horrified by her own actions, but unable to stop herself. The hunger was all-consuming, primitive. It spooked the hell out of my dad, but he was a first-time father. Pregnancy cravings were a thing. And what the hell did he know? I was strong too. Too strong for a developing fetus. I broke 3 of her ribs as I grew, and the doctors couldn't explain how. But worse than the physical symptoms was the fear. My mother carried around a consuming, endless sense of doom that didn't abate until my birth. She couldn't describe it, couldn't rationalize it, but she was terrified. Not of birth, not of me specifically, but of something else. Something she could sense but not see. It was during her 3rd trimester that she reached out to Sylvia. I think the fear finally overcame her pride, her justified anger at her mother's abuse. No matter their strained relationship, she wanted her mama. And surprisingly, Sylvia came. I found my mother's diary after she passed, and that's how I learned about Sylvia's brief return to our family's life. According to the entries, Sylvia was different, softer, more present. She doted on my mother, cooked for her, helped prepare the nursery. My mother wrote about hope, about the possibility of healing generational wounds through shared experiences of motherhood. Sylvia was respectful, helpful, an anchor during a stressful time. Until she tried to drown me in the bathtub when I was 2 weeks old. My dad found her just in time. He didn't see the knife at first. He was too focused on fishing my tiny body out of the water. Sylvia stabbed him, but the blade caught mostly fabric and just a bit of flesh. She was small, malnourished from years of religious fasting and self-imposed punishment, so my father was able to subdue her while still holding on to me. My mother came running when she heard the commotion, and that's when Sylvia started screaming. The things she screamed haunted my mother, enough that she wrote about them constantly in her journals, etched permanently into ink-stained pages as much as her mind. Sylvia had raved about a curse on the women in our family, about how she hadn't been strong enough to kill my mother when she had the chance, and she wouldn't make that mistake with me. Apparently, she screamed so hard she coughed up blood. She begged my mother to end our line. Said each daughter born was like rolling dice. Not all of us would birth daughters, she said. Some of us would birth something else entirely. They took her away in handcuffs, still screeching about darkness, and choosing and something about rooms deep underground where the brides would go. The doctors diagnosed her with religious psychosis, citing her involvement with the New Eden community as the root cause of her break from reality. 3 weeks later, they found her hanging from a bedsheet noose in her room at the psychiatric facility. She left behind a single note for my mother. I tried to save you from being chosen. Now you must save your daughter and the bloodline before they find her. My parents did their best to give me a normal childhood after that. They never spoke of Sylvia or what happened, though sometimes I'd catch my mother staring at me with this uncertain look in her eyes. But nothing happened. I grew up, went to college, got a degree in biochemistry, and landed a job in pharmaceutical research. I was the very model of rationality and scientific thinking. Then my parents died in a car accident when I was 27. The police said a deer jumped into the road, causing my father to swerve. Their car hit a tree at 60 miles per hour. The officer who called me said they died instantly, but I later read the coroner's report. The impact didn't kill them. The fire did. Witnesses said the car burst into flames before it hit the tree, though the mechanics found nothing wrong with the fuel line or electrical system. I spiraled after their death. Grief does strange things to people, makes them reckless, desperate for connection. That's how I ended up in a bar 3 months after the funeral, drinking whiskey like it was water, and going home with a stranger whose face I can barely remember. The pregnancy test came back positive 6 weeks later. The symptoms started immediately, and they were eerily familiar from my mother's diary entries. Like her, I developed an insatiable craving for raw meat. I fought it, knew it had to be bad for the baby. My mind searches for answers in science. Perhaps I had an iron deficiency and needed a protein boost. Maybe there was a genetic component. I held out for almost 2 months before I gave it. And me, it was the best thing I'd ever tasted. I'd find myself standing in my kitchen at 3 a.m., blood dripping down my chin as I devoured raw chicken hearts I'd bought for the dogs. I loved the sound they made, sinew and muscle giving way beneath my teeth. The fever came next, a constant, low-grade burn that no doctor could explain. My skin would bruise at the slightest touch. But there were new symptoms too, ones my mother hadn't experienced. I started having dreams, horrible, vivid dreams of dark underground rooms where something waited in the shadows. It wasn't a memory, I knew that, but it was real. I knew that too, somehow. Harriet was born on a moonless night in October. The delivery room lights flickered and died just as she crowned, and when she finally emerged, she didn't cry. She just stared at me with eyes that seemed too knowing for a newborn. The nurses said it was normal, that some babies are just quiet. They ran some tests, signed the birth certificate, swaddled her, and gave her back to me. I went home a day later, alone and relieved. It was short-lived. As she grew, it became clear something wasn't right. Harriet never babbled like other babies. She didn't laugh or cry, just watched, always watching. By age 2, she was diagnosed with solar urticaria, an extreme sensitivity to sunlight that kept her indoors during the day. Her skin would blister and burn within seconds of sun exposure, so we became creatures of the night, venturing out only after sunset. The doctors ran test after test, checking for autism, selective mutism, any explanation for her complete lack of verbal communication. Everything came back normal. But I began to wonder. Small paranoid thoughts began to fester in my mind. I saw the way animals reacted to her, the way neighborhood dogs would whimper and hide when we passed, the way birds would fall silent and still when she looked at them. At night, I'd often find her standing at her bedroom window, small hands pressed against the glass, staring out at our moonlit street, as if waiting for something or someone. Sometimes, I swore I could hear her whispering, though she'd been nonverbal her entire life. I made a good show of being stern at first, demanding she go to bed. She'd go willingly enough. Oh, she always obedient. But after the 7th or 8th time I caught her standing there, rigid and whispering, I stopped chiding her. Stopped searching for her in the night at all. Truth be told, she scared the shit out of me. I'd simply stand in the doorway, watching her silently, rehearsed admonishments curdling in my mouth. One time, as if she'd somehow heard my footsteps, she looked back over her shoulder at me. We simply looked at each other for nearly 15 silent minutes. I swear to God, when I turned to walk away, I think she smirked. She turned 5 on a Monday. The brides of Christendom came on the following Tuesday. 2 women in flowing white robes stood on my doorstep, pamphlets in hand. Their skin was pale, their hair so black it seemed to absorb light. Familiar coloring. I saw similar features whenever I stared in the mirror each morning. I remember staring down at that pamphlet, debating with myself. But I'd been living with a strange little child for 5 harrowing years by that point, and I'd recently finished reading all of my mother's journals. I'd read Sylvia's warning. So I mentioned my grandmother had been part of their community once, and their eyes lit up with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Sylvia's granddaughter, one of them breathed, reaching out to touch my hand. "We've been looking for you for so long." I shouldn't have invited them in, but I was desperate for answers about my family history, about Sylvia. They sat primly on my couch, their white robes pooling around them like spilled milk. We talked about mundane things at first. The weather, the neighborhood, their charitable work. They were articulate and warm, speaking passionately about their women's shelters and educational programs. Something about their careful politeness reminded me of funeral directors. Then Harriet wandered into the room. The change was subtle but immediate. One of them stopped mid-sentence, her carefully practiced smile faltering for just a moment. They exchanged a glance that lasted a fraction too long. The younger one leaned forward slightly, hands clasped in her lap so tightly her knuckles blowed white. "What a beautiful child," the older one said. "Is she yours?" "Yes. Biological." "Why does that matter?" They began asking questions then, each one seemingly innocent but somehow wrong. Had she always been so quiet? Did she have many friends her age? Was she eating well? Did she sleep through the night? When was her last checkup? When I tried to steer the conversation back to Sylvia, they barely seemed to hear me. Their attention remained fixed on Harriet, who stood silently in the doorway, watching them with her unnaturally still gaze. "We have a wonderful children's program," the younger one said, reaching into her bag. "Many special little girls like Harriet have found their true purpose with us, their true family." Something about the way she said purpose made my skin crawl. I asked them to leave. That night, I heard voices from Harriet's room. Not children's voices, something else. Something that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. When I burst in, she was alone, but her walls, they were covered in drawings. I've worked in pharmaceutical research. I've seen medical textbooks with detailed surgical procedures. Nothing prepared me for what my 4-year-old had drawn. Women split open from throat to pelvis, their organs replaced with writhing shapes that might have been tentacles or might have been something worse. Faces caught in moments of transformation, skin peeling back to reveal something underneath that didn't follow the rules of anatomy. Not a simple child's doodling, I'm telling you. The drawings grew more detailed every night, more disturbing. She drew them with anything she could find. Crayons, markers, her own blood when I took away her art supplies. I'd washed the walls clean before bed only to find them covered again by morning. The images more elaborate, more horrifying. Naked women being penetrated by shadows that seemed to move on the paper. I have no idea how she even knows what sex is. She doesn't watch television, shows little interest in books, doesn't speak with, and therefore cannot be influenced by neighborhood kids. I'm not even sure if you could call what she drew sex. To be frank, it came across as more violent, ritualistic. The changes in Harriet accelerated after that. Her skin began to slow off in patches, revealing something dark and iridescent underneath. Her eyes gradually darkened until they were completely black, and her fingernails turned the color of tar. I tried to convince myself it was some kind of infection, but deep down, I knew better. At the start, I took her to see doctors and specialists, but nothing worked. When they started mentioning prolonged hospitalization and tests, Harriet would act out, violently, both towards me and herself. But at this point, despite spending a lifetime grounded in the exploration of the real, for priding myself in being an individual of sound logic, I knew this was something else. Nothing that medicine could explain. Something other. She stopped sleeping. I'd find her standing in different rooms at night, perfectly still, her head tilted at an angle that made my neck hurt just to look at. Sometimes she'd track movement I couldn't see, her black eyes following invisible things across the ceiling. The houseplants started dying, then the grass in our yard, spreading outward from her bedroom window in a perfect circle. I found her in the neighbor's yard one night, crouched over their German shepherd. The dog's chest was torn open, and Harriet's face was buried in the cavity. When she looked up at me, blood dripping from her chin, she spoke for the first time. The sound she made wasn't English, wasn't anything human. It reminded me of the sound oil makes when it hits a hot pan. All sizzle and hiss, but underneath was something else. Something that made me taste metal and smell burning hair. I ran inside and vomited until there was nothing left but bile. Forgive me, but I was a mother, and I loved her despite it all. I buried the dog before the sun rose, feigned ignorance when the neighbors came knocking, I found the dog's collar days later, hidden beneath Harriet's pillow like some kind of trophy. She should have been locked up in a psychiatric ward that day, but I was weak, and besides, it wouldn't have worked. Desperate, I began researching the New Eden community. I found an online forum for survivors and connected with a user called TheWickedBellow82. She seemed to know things, horrible things, about the community's true purpose, about the 7 compounds spread across North America, Germany, and Australia, about the rooms deep underground where they took the girls who were ready. Her messages became increasingly frantic as we talked. She told me about her time in the compound, about the screams that echoed up from below, about the girls who went down with flat stomachs and came up 9 months later with something moving under their skin. She would have gone herself if she hadn't developed a cancer young that rendered her likely infertile. Thank asterisk for osteosarcoma, she joked. Then she asked about Harriet's symptoms, and each answer I gave made her more agitated. You need to end it, she wrote finally, before they complete the circle, before all 7 are born. I can't find her account anymore. I hope nothing has happened to her. But that brings us to tonight. Tonight, I woke to a smell like rotting meat. Following it led me to Harriet's room, where I found a pile of what looked like shed snake skin, but I recognized the birthmark on one piece. The blood trail led to our bathroom, where I found her. Jesus, I can barely write it. I can't describe what my daughter had become. What sat in our bathtub looked almost right, but wrong in ways my mind couldn't properly process. Like when you see a face in a dream and know it's your mother, but wake up remembering features that couldn't possibly fit together into a human face. Parts of her seemed to fade in and out of my vision, as if whatever she was becoming couldn't fully exist in our reality. When she moved, her joints bent in directions that made my eyes hurt. Her skin rippled like oil on water. And underneath, God, underneath was something that made me understand why Sylvia went mad. I did what my grandmother had tried to do, what she knew needed to be done. The thing that had been my daughter thrashed and fought, but in the end, I held it under the water. I kept whispering, I'm sorry, even as its claws tore into my arms. Even as I watched my baby girl's face shift between human and monster under the thrashing water. The hardest part wasn't the physical struggle. It was when she stopped fighting. When her face became human again, and she looked up at me through the water with those big brown eyes. My eyes, and reached for me like she used to when she was small. Like she wanted her mama to hold her. But I'd seen what was inside her now. I knew what was coming. I held on until the bubbles stopped, and then I ran. I don't know what I'm doing. I want to die. I should die. I shouldn't be in the first place. I'm standing under a bridge somewhere downtown. Did I mention that? I'm wet, and I just killed my daughter, only she wasn't. Or she is, but she's also something else as well. To anyone reading this, if you've escaped from the brides of Christendom, if you carry their bloodline, please, don't have children. Don't let them complete their circles of 7. Something is coming, something ancient and hungry, and it's using our daughters as doorways. I know what the scene in my bathroom looks like. I know what they'll think I've done. But please, someone has to investigate the compounds. Look for the dark rooms. Count the pregnant girls. Maybe then you'll understand why I had to. This man is not my husband. When Mr. Marner's wife returned to him through Region Services, it seemed like a miracle. I remember the day pretty well, despite it being so long ago. 6 years back, the van drove past my son, and I at our beaten-up basketball hoop almost unnoticed. It was that discreet. If anything stood out in hindsight, it was that the windows were way too tinted, almost black. And normally this wasn't anything I'd consider strange. Only once it parked behind Mr. Marner's home did it catch my attention, as well as the other handful of neighbors that were outside that windy Friday afternoon. Since his wife's passing a month previous, the only visitors the old man had were his daughter and a few members of their church. So of course a strange visitor would stand out regardless of who they were. In truth, sad as it was, the main spectacle was that our neighborhood was not the place where a region van would stop for business. It was equivalent to seeing a Ferrari parked outside a crack house. That's the brain people, right? Vry had asked, the basketball tucked under his skinny, pale arm as he slid himself under my own, still clingy in the way I would come to miss at the arrival of his preteen years. For now, he was still just 10 years old. The ones from the TV. Yeah, that's them. I was distracted by trying to spy the hubbub from our little hilltop apartment parking lot. I saw Bray frown from the corner of my vision and interpreted his suspicious quiet before he could finish setting up his throw. I caught the basketball before it could slam into my gut and grinned at him. I led him across our imaginary court on the asphalt with a dribble and made like I was about to slam dunk, a quick distraction from the curiosity churning in my gut. But Bry saw through it and yanked the ball from my grip. He seemed pretty invested in our game, or at least I thought so before he ran to the edge of the lot and stared down at the spectacle going on outside Mr. Marner's home once more. They're opening the van. He spoke up as I returned to his side. So that's what one of them looks like open. The van's all full of lights and computers and stuff. Aggie Manilow said in art class one time that, what's the word? Yeah, they brought back her dad a little long ago, and that's why she was gone for so long after winter break. They were celebrating. When the late Mrs. Marner stepped out of the van as a Princess Maida carriage, I understood why they would have celebrated. I'd been one of the people that ran to Mr. Marner's aid that cold early morning, when he'd stumbled out of his house and laid in the cold powder snow with his hands clutching his chest. His next-door neighbor asked if it was his heart, but he'd shook his head and just pointed a shaking finger toward the dark interior of their home. It was as though the yawning mouth of the open front door whispered the news before my brain could string together the logic. Sally Marner was pushing through her late 80s, and a week prior she had fallen in her garden. She was stuck there, under the thick cotton weave of the sky's blessedly unched snow, before her husband Willard returned from the dialysis appointment their daughter Robin had driven him to. Mrs. Marner was back home from the hospital and in palliative end-of-life care before the sun was set the following day. Of course she was gone. Of course she would die. But her husband was still so shocked, so pained, as if no amount of prepping, even a lifetime's worth of knowing and understanding the concept of death, could prepare him for her loss. Through my feelings of condolence, I was overtaken by jealousy, that a love could be so strong its lovers are devastated that death can so much as touch it. So when an identical region van showed up in front of my home the day my husband came home from the hospital, too confined to a brief remainder of life in palliative care, I was stunned and was at my door before either of the men who left the vehicle could knock. They didn't seem the sort to be driving a car like that, the kind of van that usually held equipment for a plumber or electrician. Their suits were finely pressed, if a bit ill-fitted, but they were the sort of tall and slender that could pull off that sort of poorly kept aesthetic without appearing bummish. "Can I help you?" The question was almost for myself. What could they possibly need from me? If this is a sales call, I'm sorry, but frankly I could never afford your services. Mrs. Derringer, the tallest of the pair, smiled with enviously straight white teeth. "You already know my name." That certainly left a foul taste in my mouth. "We've traveled quite a long way to meet you," he continued. "Please, may we come in?" I thought about my son. He would be home in about a half hour, depending on the school bus, and my husband on oxygen in the living room behind me. Still, the Midwestern aspects in me fought with the two halves of their dual nature. The wanton hospitality that saw how tall and skinny these young men were and wanted to bring them inside to the corn muffins I'd made that morning, and that ever-present knee-jerk reaction of get off my property. And what new property it was, having only been purchased a few months prior. It felt good to finally have a stable home and to own the land beneath it, even if it was squalid and a constant work in progress. I don't know why I let them in. I wished I hadn't the moment they crossed the threshold of our front door. The air felt cold despite the roaring fireplace behind us. My husband lay soundly asleep on the living room sofa. The hospice nurse at our bedroom upstairs would be harder on all of us to keep him in. The oxygen machine my husband was attached to made rhythmic huffs in time with his slowed breathing, clicking as the thinnest hand on the clock might tick away seconds, a moment divvied on a wheel. Every successful draw of breath he took in on that sofa I anticipated being his last, and wondered if my oxygen would go with him. Holt, the taller boy with blonde hair past his ears, held out his hand, which I didn't take. He curled his fingers in and smiled as though he were pretending not to choke on bitter food. And my partner here is Vince. Partner as in? God, no. Holt laughed the sort of way someone did to shake loose tension, like unwinding the cap on something fizzy to drink. He's not my type. We're sorry for your loss, Vince said with a suddenly morose tone, and it smacked me in a strange sort of sting. He hasn't passed yet, I said. Apologies. It's just that, having done this for so long, it's impossible not to see the writing on the wall. And if you don't accept our offer, it may be the only time we can outstretch our condolences for the hardship on your horizon. If this is your idea of a sales tactic, I'd highly suggest another field of work. I began bitterly, seating myself in the armchair across the loveseat the two salesmen seated themselves on. Is that your method? To bully us poor potential widows and widowers into buying your expensive services by making us fear the outcome we're already resigned to? Sorry to burst your bubble, but that sort of perverse psychology won't work on me. You mean reverse psychology, Vince attempted to correct me. No, I showed my teeth in a mama bear smile. I do mean perverse. We offer hope, Mrs. Derringer. The tallest one outstretched his hand to me to shake. I was surprised by its roughness, his skin dry and leathery like a farmhand's. Reminded me of being on Daddy's old farm. He'd sold it off a few years after I'd married Christopher, and I kicked myself every so often for not taking Bri there when we had the chance. I wonder if I'd misinterpreted the salesman's overlong blonde hair as a surfer's when in reality he was a bit country woods, like me. Don't mind him. He doesn't have the capacity for fully appreciating the delicate nature of this subject yet. He's training. We're all new, once. Vince sighed wistfully. He's also prone to saying vague yet somehow comforting statements of the obvious for some reason. Always quirks with newbies. Regardless of him, Mrs. Derringer, we've got a proposition for you. Have you heard about Region Services, ma'am? Was I imagining it? Or was Holt's accent noticeably becoming more and more oriented toward the south? An old neighbor of mine. He used your product a few years ago. Other than the results, I'm not sure I know anything else about it. The ads on television at the time made it seem like some sort of memory regeneration service. When the van arrived at his house, I expected him to be taken away for testing or something. Not for his late wife to walk out as if she hadn't passed away. I see. Let's start with our company name. Here. He handed me a brochure, printed on fine cardstock, a texture that bordered on luxurious. I didn't realize paper could feel like it cost a fortune before. It felt like I wasn't wealthy enough to hold it. Regen is short for regeneration, as I'm sure you've guessed, and our services are, well, I just sell the stuff. And let me tell you, it does sound too good to be true. That's why we only offer it to those we know are in, well, dire straits. Dire, I repeated. Mrs. Derringer, what's the likelihood of your husband recovering from his accident? Vince asked. I don't see how any of this is any of your business, either of you. And frankly, I've bitten my tongue. But how the hell do you people know so much about our situation? Was it the hospital? That's a violation of our rights if they shared our private medical information with your company. And I don't know much about lawsuits, but... Mrs. Derringer, Holt spoke again. I can assure you, all that's above our pay grade. We're armed with whatever information our supervisor provides us with, and we're meant to make a wholehearted sales pitch, which I guess ends in this question. Wouldn't it be better for everyone if no one had to die from some stupid mistake or accident? Age, sometimes we can't help that, but you can consider us like life insurance. Only instead of financial support, we ensure that you won't have to go without your loved ones before their time is up. Get out of my house. I could feel the disgust in my mouth, oily and bitter over the syllables. Please. But I kept the brochure clutched in my hand. When the two of them had left, with their black-on-black van down the road and almost out of sight, I opened the brochure and turned toward my husband. His eyes were open, sunken, as the motor function to open and close them was sporadic since the accident. He needed his eye drops again, but I put my eyes on the brochure first. Perhaps I should have let them do their whole spiel. A lot of the jargon printed was complicated and twisty. They think they can save you, Chris. I murmured as I used the lubricating drops on his dark eyes, gummed up with drying eye fluid. His pupils fluttered, and I wondered if it was recognition or fear. I wonder if I should let them try. Then Bry, now 15, found the pamphlet, and I no longer had a choice. I'd have to let Region Services bring my husband back from the brink. Free, I repeated myself for likely the dozenth time. My breath fogged up the glass of the observation room, where I watched the region scientists and doctors put my husband into a medical coma. This portion, I wasn't worried about, especially because he'd been put under and in comas, both natural and induced, several times since the incident almost a year ago now. The rest of the process was the nerve-wracking part. I still couldn't believe this was even something that exists, much less something I didn't have to pay for. Remind me of the success rate. The nurse minding the vitals from outside the room smiled, knowing I'd asked the same question about every 10 minutes. 80%, Mrs. Derringer. The 20 that didn't make it were much, much older than your husband and had a whole slew of health risks. I have full faith he'll pull through. I tried to let that comfort me. If I was honest, nothing about this comforted me, even the notion of my husband getting a new lease on life. I was too nervous, teeth practically chattering from the way panic had me freezing. But I'd be a fool not to take this opportunity, and Bry would never forgive me if we didn't at least try. They're dosing him with another sedative now, the nurse explained as I watched one of the doctors in identical blue medical coveralls accept a syringe from a nurse in a similar getup, only white in color. This one is a local anesthetic for the tube they'll insert at the base of the skull. And well, some of what they're doing is stuff I'm not trained on. I'm vitals and prep support. They'll place them in the special region isolation chamber so he won't be exposed to any more germs or bacteria. And from there, he'll get wheeled off to the other room where they'll perform the procedure. We can't watch that part. They say we wouldn't want to see it regardless. All these months of blood and tissue samples, physical exams, and the waiting. It's so, sorry, it's terrifying. I couldn't help but admit. I think it's supposed to be scary, but it makes the recovery that much sweeter. The nurse smiled. It will be like your husband is as good as new, and it will keep looking just like him. I asked, biting my nails. The regenerated version of him. I can't help but hate the idea. A brain transplant into the cloned body of the person they're transplanted from. It's like all the humanity in me is twisted up over it. You believe in God, Mrs. Derringer? No, not really. Sort of I suppose. I rubbed my head, struggling to absorb the reality of where I was and what I was doing to the man I'd married over 20 years ago. I mean, there's got to be a reason why we're all here, as a species, right? Maybe I do believe a little more than I thought. Maybe that's why this feels sort of wrong. I wasn't asking about it for you to go worrying like that. I'm sorry. I was gonna ask. You want me to pray with you? The nurse asked me with a tone so kind it sprung tears in my eyes, and wordlessly I nodded. Then I'll pray with you. Come here. When they at last brought my husband back, there was a strange feeling of relief, like I'd been holding my lungs so still from fear of breathing. It felt as though if I moved wrong, everything would come toppling down. Bry was in the waiting room with both sets of his grandparents, some aunts and uncles, my sister and her kids. He stood up and ran to me, excited but scared all at once. At 15, this was one hug I was going to treasure, as I rarely got them these days. I tousled his hair and nodded at our family. It had begun. Waiting was agony, as waiting usually was. Hours rolled by as Bryce slowly whittled away at my sparse stash of dollar bills and quarters for snacks and drinks. Ordinarily, we limited those things at home, but right now I had more important things to worry about than a few cans of Mountain Dew. I don't understand why it couldn't be done in a regular hospital. I caught Mama complaining to Daddy. He didn't care much for hospitals anyways, but some hoity-toity medical facility was even less his speed. I couldn't really disagree. The waiting room we sat in was more like one for a spa than for a facility where they were gutting my husband's brain like a jack-o'-lantern and shoving it in a copy of his own body. Though frankly, I didn't know what a waiting room for something like that should look like anyway. This place gives me the heebie-jeebies. They need to do it wherever they can. Greta, Chris's mother, snapped. Please, keep your complaints to yourself. It's not your child's life on the line here. I'm still confused how it got to this point, Chris's father chimed in. Chris was healthy as a horse. All of a sudden, he has a stroke that knocks him out a window, and then he's paralyzed from the neck down, still having seizures and strokes. He choked up. It isn't right. Me and you. He looked to his wife. We're supposed to go first. Whether it ain't right or ain't fair, it's still your boy, Daddy said. Be strong for him. Mark, Louise, Daddy's right. I insisted, desperately wanting the subject dropped. As if I hadn't been plagued by my husband's health and potential recovery enough already. We have to keep faith. Rich, coming from you. Louise scoffed, but no one said anything more on the matter. Mama, Bryce sat beside me and leaned his head on my shoulder. No matter what happened, whether my husband lived or not, this moment in between the beginning and the fallout was more precious than gold. X. This man is not my husband. It started small. The doctors assured me that his memory would be fuzzy, jumbled even, but would write itself out over the course of months. It had been over 3, and each time after his monthly 3-day stays at their facility, to observe him and make sure his new body wasn't under any sort of duress or rejection of the procedure. Each time he came back, his memory was stronger than the last time he went and was brought back. Our son was thrilled. Of course he was. No son wants to lose their father. I was hesitant, waiting for the other shoe to drop, or maybe even for Chris himself to drop. It was unnerving how right he seemed. He'd needed almost no recovery time after the procedure, and his scaring, though there, was minimal. I had expected many things, even miracles, but not total rewriting of what I thought I knew about science and reality as a whole. Bry wouldn't have noticed, but a wife knows. He chose the wrong cereal. That was the first thing that rang with wrongness. I'd left our bedroom early on a Saturday morning and found him crunching away on the same sugary cereal as our son on the sofa while they watched some local hockey game on our living room television. Such a small thing, and under normal circumstances I supposed a wife would take it as a father trying to bond with his son. But the thing was, Chris was very particular about his foods. He didn't enjoy sweets, and he didn't enjoy hockey. He was a football man, through and through, and he'd totally blown up at Bry over the fact he wanted to play hockey over Chris's preferred sport. He was reading more, and faster than ever before. At first, I chalked it up to his quick recovery and free time from his lack of employment. His job at the construction company had graciously given him an equivalent position to his old one at a site a bit farther out than his previous one. A whole new crew included, but it wouldn't start for another 2 months given it was the winter. Before, it was only Ever magazines or the few books he'd read over and over in his life. Old Yeller, Where the Red Fern Grows, even the Harry Potter books, since he'd taken a liking to them when he read them to our son some 10 years ago. He was reading everything now, as though no amount of words was enough to consume. Historical nonfiction about ancient Rome, cheesy romance novels, cookbooks. I'd even caught him with an astrology book on more than one occasion. A true, dizzying mix of information. Was it the new lease on life? I told myself over and over it wasn't strange. He was just changed. I'd catch him peering through the cracked door of our son's room at night, watching him while he slept the way he did when Bri was a child, and finally able to sleep on his own. He'd pet our dog for sometimes upward of an hour, not while multitasking, just sitting and staring with a vacant sort of smile. When I spoke to our region caseworker, she informed me that it was simply him adjusting to his new body, a body without pain, a body which may end up living an extended lifetime, thanks to its newness. I supposed it made sense, in its own way. The important thing to me, though, was that he no longer hit me. Of course, I didn't tell the staff at Region Services that. The bruises that used to regularly discolor my skin from shoulder to knee were almost gone, just scars and permanent discolorations of burst blood vessels and blown veins that were easily enough explained away as varicose at my age. It was harder to hide the marks from Bri when he was younger. Wearing rash guard swim shirts and trunks to the public pool definitely helped, and I made certain to change only in the privacy of the bathroom or bedroom when he became old enough to start registering that Mommy had marks on her body that weren't normal. Chris caught me examining myself in the mirror, our eyes locked in our reflections in the bedroom mirror, my mouth frozen half open in shock, and instead of lashing out at the sight of his handiwork, or slamming the door shut at presumably his own disgust, he moved in to embrace me from behind. He held me gently where I stood topless, the intimacy so rare and confounding it almost hurt worse than any blow he'd ever delivered to me, and as soon as it started, it stopped. He left, and I wondered if the moment had ever happened at all. Guess. The final puzzle piece was when I woke up uncharacteristically early, around 4 a.m., and found that my husband wasn't in bed. This wasn't unusual. Since his recovery after the Region procedure, there were many nights where he'd wander out of our room, saying he'd walked around the neighborhood or read some more, totally antsy and raring with energy. I'm unsure if I'd caught him on a rough night, or if this was genuinely what he had been doing each night he'd slid out of bed, but neither answer soothed me. I saw a light coming from the living room below. I thought about some mornings where I'd found him conked out on the sofa, and decided I'd bring him a blanket just in case he'd fallen asleep down there again. The light, however, was coming from the hall bathroom, the one we rarely used except by guests. The door was ajar, and I could hear a voice. He was muttering, just above his breath, in a slow and monotonous manner I'd never heard from him before, and it sounded so foreign. Drawn out, repetitive, a strange forced lilt in the center of otherwise almost hypnotized tones. I crept as close as I dared, fearing the floorboards would give me away. Was he sleepwalking? I moved closer, letting the shadows hide me as I watched my husband stare at himself with an expression so blank it was as no facial muscles, save for the necessary ones to speak, were used, and only slightly at that. I caught on to the repetitive sentence structures once they began to make sense, his voice droning almost like the way I'd imagine an insect would speak. Christopher Derringer. I am 46 years old. Your fav. My favorite color is green. I was born in July, the 7th month. My wife is a lovely woman named Audrey, and we have one child. One son. A boy. I am a boy. No, a man. I am a man. I work in construction. I am afraid of heights. I have a scar on my left elbow from a surgery. It means I can no longer play football. I love football. I was shaking. The voice was my husband's, yet something totally different. The sound felt like it bore into my ears, the way the vibrational ringing of a bell might when standing beneath. The blanket fell from my arms, a soft sound that normally would go unheard if not for the stillness of the night. I wanted to run away, to pretend I hadn't heard anything. At best, I had caught a man trying his best to recover from a traumatic surgical procedure, doing what he could to regain his memories, and at worst, most sinisterly, this man was not my husband. Not actually. And it was the option that made the most sense. I had lived with Christopher Derringer for 22 years and knew him better than anyone. What set him off? What encouraged him? What made him tick? None of those attributes were part of him anymore. And now I finally had the understanding. The confirmation of why. Our eyes met through the reflection of the mirror, mine visible through the sliver of warm light slicing across me through the ajar bathroom door. I expected shock, anger, even sadness, something to cross his face. Not a smile. Not a warm, loving smile. He turned to face me and opened the door to pull me into an embrace. Our chests pressed into one another, two heartbeats thumping at drastically different rhythms. His was perfect and steady. Mine raced as though I were being constricted by a python. Christopher hadn't hugged me with any sincerity in over 10 years. Not since the drinking, since the layoff he'd had way back then, when he'd first laid his hands on me with something other than love. He cupped my hand in his, new skin, without the calluses of all the years of hard work he put into his craft. I thought absently about how that would make his job that much harder when he returned in the coming weeks. "I know what he did to you," Christopher said, in a voice both his and of someone new. "I've also seen the memories of you through his mind. They're all so new that I have to teach them to myself, as if I'm a schoolboy learning a lesson from a video on an AV cart. Do you remember those?" Christopher. I didn't know what to say. I guess I hoped hearing his name would snap him out of this odd state and bring us back in the ballpark of the game we'd been playing since our son was 5 years old. "I know what you did to him too," he continued, and my blood was hardly different than ice pumping through my body at what felt like 40 miles per hour. "He saw you, that last time. You'd been dosing his bourbon with shots of antifreeze, but he wasn't sure for how long. Just that it suddenly made sense, why he was so sick. He'd just finished a drink when he caught you topping off the bottle. You fought, struggled, and it was you or him. One of you was going through the window, and he was too drunk, and you were too tired." Christopher. I understand. I see through his mind's memories. As much as I'm him, I'm also someone new. I swear, to whoever or whatever you believe in or whatever is in charge in this world, that I will never, ever lay a finger on you the way he did. Maybe it's because this body is new, sober, or maybe it's payback for what he did for you, and the universe is setting it right. Either way, I'm here, and I will make our lives so much better. Don't you see? You'll never have to flinch when I'm near you again, or sleep afraid that I'll wander in drunk looking for a punching bag. I'm exactly what you need, Audrey. Please, let me love you." We kissed tearfully. I'm not sure whose tears I tasted on our tongues, but the salt danced across my palate the way blood used to when he'd launch his fist in my direction so many times before. I wanted to believe him, to trust that the nightmare, the long groaning nightmare of waiting to die at his hands or to be caught for his death at my own, was over. It was over. It had to be. Because this man was not my husband, and I don't think I mind in the slightest. I found an open Toys R Us. If you're a 90s kid like me, you have fond memories of Toys R Us. It was basically a child's heaven. An entire store the size of Walmart, but only with toys. Infinite rows of Pokemon cards, Lisa Frank, Game Boys, Super Soakers, Tamagotchis, everything. Every time my sister and I went, it would be an exercise in manipulation. How much could we persuade our parents to buy for us? Because if they'd let us, we'd buy out the whole store. When I heard that Toys R Us went bankrupt, I found myself sadly nostalgic. One by one, the stores disappeared. The ones around where I live met the same fate as the Kmarts before them. They became abandoned concrete structures, surrounded by an empty parking lot filled with potholes. And like the Kmarts, it seemed like they could never find a store the right size or style to lease the space. I saw a Spirit Halloween in one once, but it stood empty for years before eventually getting torn down. But then my sister Jess and I went on a road trip together to visit our sick mom. And during the drive, somewhere in the middle of Indiana, we found a Toys R Us that was open. I couldn't believe my eyes. We'd gotten lost trying to find our way back to the highway after stopping for fast food. We found ourselves in an empty parking lot, surrounded on two sides by a thick forest of pine trees. But in the center was a large building with the colorful letters Toys R Us. Oh my gosh, Jess gasped. I thought they all closed. But the store was clearly open. The lights shone brightly from inside, showing rows and rows of toys through the large windows. I slowed to a stop. Can we go in? I asked Jess. For old time's sake. Let's do it. I pulled into a parking space, and the two of us approached. I had to admit, I was pretty excited. What is it about hitting your early 30s that seems to punch up the nostalgia in your brain? It's like some weird defense mechanism, like your brain knows it's not so young anymore, and it's desperately trying to cling to the past. Maybe we also yearn for a time before smartphones and social media, when the highest tech thing was a 3 LCD screen showing Pokemon. I don't know. By the time we reached the glass doors, my body was thrumming with excitement. For a second, I thought they might not open, but with a quiet whoosh, they did. We stepped inside, and for a second, we just stared. Colorful aisles of toys, as far as the eye could see. Paradise for a kid, a trip down memory lane for the rest of us. But then I took a closer look, and I realized there wasn't any Minecraft or Paw Patrol or newfangled stuff. There was a display for Pokemon, featuring Pikachu and the original 3 starters, not the weird-ass new ones nobody likes. There was a display of Super Soakers and Nerf guns, front and center. It felt like stepping back in time. Eyes yellow and blind with pain arose in place of the old, and as Jordan raised one hand to clutch at her face, I saw the knuckles bent in two, nails coiled in vicious crescents of black enamel. Jordan stood shaking and groaning on her hind legs, the rag of her nitrous torn off in the vehemence of her change, and still I could not move, though I knew now why she had kept so many animals, and why once a month I was driven away. "Go," said Jordan again, and the command had many syllables, language forced through the throat of a beast. Whether she would have retained her speech or human faculties much longer after that, I'll never know. Pushing off from the sink, I vaulted out of the room and ran through the house, aware with every step of Jordan staggering after me in chase. Only by the time I'd reached the hallway and gotten open the front door was she on all fours, as she clearly yearned to be. My last glimpse of Jordan was of a tortured lunatic abomination, human enough even beneath the hair and across swords of teeth that she appeared as what she was, a woman forced to kneel by the disfiguring strength of her moon-born disease. I spent the remainder of the night in a horror-struck delirium, tossing about so furiously in my bed that there were times I thought she must have caught me with some light scratch I'd been too drowned by my adrenaline to notice, and that I too would change. As it was, I recovered by morning, having in my fever accepted what I'd seen, even if I had no understanding of it. I remembered that Jordan had driven me out, had saved me from my own stupidity in that curious trespass on her night alone, and knew that I still loved her, though she would have killed or turned me in the end. So I went out to look for her, knocking upon her front door at the height of day when I knew it was safe. I heard her shift about in the house, but for all that I called and pleaded for her to answer, she refused to open the door. Possessing no key to the house, I had no way in except by force, which I knew better than to attempt. I did, however, stand at the window of the menagerie room to squint through a gap in the curtains, drawn despite myself by the question of what had become of the inhabitants. The cage doors stood open, each warped by force into shapes like weird alien skeletons. Across the floor lay a rug of drying blood, the heads of animals and tangled viscera parts submerged and stamped by the green-black stones of flies like ropes of filthy jewels. As I stared upon that death room, my eyes became accustomed to its dingy light, and identified from the assorted matter that at least one of the creatures housed there had been human. I jumped away from the window as though hauled back by a cord at the base of my spine, and retreated to the other side of the street, aware even as I did so of something shifting behind the windows of my lover's house. What it thought as it watched me waver, heaving into a gutter, I do not know. I only knew that it had loved me alone enough to spare me from the starving curse of moonlight or the cage. I borrowed a human body to blend in at a high school. Now the men in black are after me. I'm Z, or at least that's what you'd call me. My actual name is an untranslatable sequence of vibrations, so Z will do. I'm an alien, yes, a real one. And last night, I made a terrible decision. I went to high school. Why? Long story short, boredom. My job was supposed to be cutting-edge research, studying Earth's organisms and ecosystems. But after a few rotations, cutting edge started to feel like cutting into my sanity. To make matters worse, my clearance gives me unrestricted access to your internet and television. And trust me, once you fall into a late-night binge of your teen dramas, you're done for. That's how I got the idea. High school seemed like the pinnacle of human experience, where all the angst, growth, and self-discovery happened. So, naturally, I had to try it. But I didn't want to observe. I wanted in. That's where Huey came in. Huey is a local teenager who was unlucky enough to walk past my cloaked ship last night. He seemed like the perfect candidate. A gangly frame, shaggy hair, and a backpack stuffed with last year's crumpled homework. Typical high schooler. I beamed him aboard, put him into a deep stasis, don't worry, he's fine, and scanned his DNA. With the help of morphinite, a substance my species uses for scientific exploration, I took on Huey's form, right down to his favorite band t-shirt. Before you panic, know this. Huey will wake up in 24 hours, perfectly healthy. In fact, I'm giving him a bonus. I've mapped out his genetic structure and fixed everything from minor cellular damage to a potential heart condition. He'll have a clean bill of health for the next 100 years. Think of it as a thank you gift for lending me his life for a day. With Huey safely resting in my ship, I flew to the high school and parked in a remote corner of the campus at 3 a.m. The cloaking field shimmered over the hull, rendering it invisible. I stepped out, Huey's sneakers squeaking against the damp pavement, and stared up at the looming entrance. This was it, my first day of high school, and I had no idea what I was doing. That's when I realized I was super early. I guess it was just my nerves, wanting to make sure everything went to plan. Can't help it. I'm an anxious alien, always trying to pre-plan, overthinking every detail. What if someone noticed the ship, even though it was cloaked? What if Huey's stasis broke? What if I forgot how to human? Since I had nothing else to do, I decided to sneak inside. The school was dark and eerily quiet, the faint smell of industrial cleaners lingering in the air. I slipped into the bathroom closest to the main entrance, locked myself in a stall, and waited. When the bell finally rang, I felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. My first class was physics. I double-checked the schedule I'd memorized from the school's website and headed to the room, doing my best to blend in with the flow of students. It was all going fine until I walked in. The teacher wasn't who I'd researched. Instead of the bespectacled middle-aged woman I'd seen in staff photos, there was a massive substitute at the front of the room. He had to be at least 6'5", bald, and almost entirely hairless, save for faint stubble around his jawline. He was dressed sharply, but his movements were unsettlingly precise, his posture rigid. The air around him practically screamed danger. I froze. I knew exactly what he was. We call them the Wardens. Humans call them Men in Black. Whatever the name, their purpose is the same. Hunt down rogue aliens who interfere with human society. They're not government agents. Not exactly. They're part of a shadowy partnership between humans and my species, a cooperation designed to maintain order. My stomach, or the human equivalent, lurched. He wasn't just a substitute. He was here for me. All right, he said, his voice deep and cold as vacuum space. Your teacher couldn't make it today. I'm Mr. Ward. Now let's start with introductions. 3 things about you. Name, where you're from, and something you're interested in. My brain short-circuited. I barely heard the first few students. I ran through every possible scenario, analyzing how I could mess this up. Then, too quickly, it was my turn. I stood awkwardly, my borrowed human limbs suddenly too long and too heavy. "I'm Huey," I stammered. My voice cracked. "Perfect. I'm from far away." My hands were sweaty. "I like quantum physics and, toaster strudels." The entire class turned to look at me. The warden's steely gaze locked onto me, unblinking. I braced myself for the moment he'd blow my cover. But then, "Okay," he said, clearly thrown off by my weird energy. He gestured to the next student. "You." The warden moved on, but I could feel him studying me out of the corner of his eye. Then something wild happened. He zeroed in on an unsuspecting kid in the second row. "You," he barked, pointing at a scrawny boy. "What's your favorite celestial body?" The kid blinked. "The moon." "What about it? Be specific." The kid looked around, his voice shaking. It's round." The class burst into laughter. "Interesting," Mr. Ward said, narrowing his eyes. "Do you prefer daytime or nighttime? Think carefully." "Daytime," the kid answered, his voice cracking. "Why?" "Because the sun's out." More laughter. Students started whispering to each other, and I could see the tension break. Whatever the warden was looking for, he wasn't finding it. For now, I was safe, but I could feel his eyes flicking back to me every now and then. This was far from over. I thought it was just a power outage. I was wrong. I awoke to the blaring sound of my phone alarm, dizzy and disoriented. I almost ignored it momentarily, but panic shot through me like an electric jolt. I grabbed my phone, squinting at the time. 4:02 a.m. "Oh, shit," I muttered, repeating it like a mantra as I bolted out of bed. I was late for work. The room was pitch black. No light from the hallway, no glow from the microwave clock. I quickly realized the power was out. My half-charged phone became my makeshift flashlight as I fumbled to get dressed. I kissed Rachel, my wife, and my daughter, whispering quickly, "Love you," before rushing out the door. But as I looked down at my daughter, her small face still frozen in sleep, something tugged at my chest. I should have taken more time. I should have kissed her, told her I loved her more than just in passing. It was one of those moments you don't realize you'll regret until it's too late. When I stepped outside, the whole complex was swallowed in darkness. No streetlights, no porch lights, not even the moon's faint glow. The air felt thick, heavier than usual, and the silence was unsettling, broken only by the faint hum of a distant car engine. "It's just a power outage," I told myself, sliding into my car. But as I drove, the darkness didn't let up. My headlights barely pierced it, illuminating only a few feet of road ahead. The void surrounding me stretched endlessly like something was blotting out the world. I passed a few other cars on the highway, their headlights flickering weakly in the gloom, like candles in a storm. One driver honked and waved frantically as they sped past, their face pale and wide-eyed. Another car pulled over, its hazard lights blinking weakly before cutting out entirely. Unease settled in my stomach, but I kept driving. The radio crackled to life with bursts of static and half-finished sentences, engulfed the city at approximately. Static. Authorities urge residents to. Static. Stay indoors until further notice. I turned it off, gripping the wheel tightly. Something wasn't right. That's when I saw it. A cluster of bright lights shimmered in the sky ahead, grouped in an unnatural pattern. At first, I thought it was a constellation or aurora borealis, but the lights were too close and vivid. They shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, like embers drifting in a breeze. I pulled into the lot of a gas station, desperate to find others. A handful of cars were parked haphazardly, their drivers standing outside, staring at the sky. I stepped out and approached them. "Hey," I called, jogging toward the group. A woman stood there, clutching a child tightly. rocking him back and forth without a word. Her face was pale, eyes filled with a haunted kind of worry. An older man leaned on a cane, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. A young guy in a baseball cap stood beside them, looking equally unnerved. "Does anyone know what's going on? Is this just a blackout?" I asked, trying to steady my voice, my heart pounding harder every second. The woman didn't respond. She just held the child tighter, rocking him faster. The young guy muttered, "I thought it was just the city. But this." He gestured to the sky, his hand trembling. The older man finally spoke, his voice low and hoarse. "Where are the stars?" I froze and looked up. He was right. The rest of the sky was empty. No stars, moon, nothing. Just the shifting cluster of lights hanging in the air like some unnatural force. My stomach churned. What the hell is that? Before I could say anything else, the cluster moved. Slowly, deliberately, the lights spiraled inward, folding over themselves. For a brief moment, I saw the stars beyond. The stars we'd been missing. Then they disappeared again, swallowed by the shifting mass. The toddler started screaming, a sharp, piercing cry that cut through the air. I felt it in my bones, the instinct that told me to run. The lights shifted again, and I realized what I saw with growing dread. It wasn't a cluster of stars. It was teeth. The lights formed the edges of a massive, spiraling maw, its ridges twisting and curling like a slow, deliberate blink. The darkness wasn't the night sky. It was the body of something so massive it blotted out everything. I stumbled back, gasping for breath. My heart pounded in my chest, too fast, too hard. Around me, people started screaming. The air grew frigid, and the ground began to tremble violently. I turned to run, but my legs wouldn't move. What was I even running from? There was nowhere to go. Before I could say anything else, Jess grabbed my arm. "Look!" I turned, and my jaw went slack. Our mother was entering the store, purple windbreaker, chin-length blonde hair in a neat bob, and in tow. A little girl with dark, wavy hair, and another, even littler girl with blonde hair like her mom. "That's us," I whispered. We stared, paralyzed, as the child versions of us stopped at the Pokémon display. Our mom leaned over and told us something, and we giggled. This can't be real. "So are you going to join them?" the woman behind us asked. For a second, with every fiber of my being, I wanted to go. What I wouldn't give to be back there, 30 years ago, before everything happened. Before the disasters of our time, before 9/11s, before COVID, before wars and genocides, before social media and smartphones and ads took over everything. I knew how horrible this world could be before I realized life was less like a walk in the park and more like a climb up a mountain. Blood, sweat, and tears. Before I knew evil, before I knew true pain, before I knew anything at all. And most important of all, before Mom got sick. I stared into the Toys R Us, at the golden sunlight and the happy faces, and all I could think of was taking a step forward. Then Mom turned around, and I stopped dead in my tracks. Her face was all wrong. Her eyes were two empty sockets, two black pits staring out at us. Her mouth was twisted in a horrible smile. It was only for the tiniest instant, but I saw it, clear as day. That's not Mom. When I turned around, however, I saw something far more terrifying. Jess was taking a step forward. No. I lurched forward and wrapped my arms around her waist. I pulled her back. We both stumbled, nearly losing our balance. Jess was crying, clawing at my arms. "I need to go," she whimpered. "I need to see Mom." When I pulled her to her feet, holding her back with all my strength, everyone in the store was looking at us. Each and everyone had those horrible, empty eye sockets. "Run," I shouted. We turned around, pushing past the goth woman, sprinting down the aisle. My lungs burned, but I kept pushing forward. We turned the corner at the back wall and kept running, running, running. I don't know exactly how long we ran for, but somehow we found ourselves at the front of the store again. It had reverted back to normal. We ran through the glass doors and burst into the parking lot, taking in lungfuls of the cool night air. Then we leaped into the car and peeled away. Jess could barely form words. Neither could I. "You saw it all, right?" she asked, finally. "Mom, us?" "Yeah," I replied. And then we both heard a crinkling sound from within the car. Jess scowled. She reached back and pulled something out of her butt pocket. "Oh no," she muttered. "I accidentally took that booster pack of Pokemon cards with us. I must have put it in my pocket when I was looking at the Furbies or something." "Throw it out the window," I said. "What?" "You don't want those things coming back and looking for it. Throw it out the window." "But it's like $300. It's not messed up like the other toys. I think it's actually an original pack." "Throw it out the window." Okay, Jess said. She rolled down the window and let the pack of cards flutter out into the breeze. Then we continued driving towards our mom's house, slightly less afraid of what was to come. I thought my girlfriend was pregnant, but I was horribly wrong. She had no wish to be a mother, a fact she'd expressed vehemently from the beginning of our relationship. Whatever maternal urges she might have had were devoted to an ever-changing zoo of exotic pets, whose complex demands swallowed up the majority of her spare time and financial resources. Yet even had she given them up, Jordan was often away with work at some job that she refused to leave. So when I began to notice symptoms that led me to believe she was carrying my child, I was unsurprised by her denial. "It's nothing," she'd snap even as she trembled queasily against me at night. "It comes and goes. I'm used to it." It agitated me that she ignored, with gritted teeth, the obvious, each cramp and twinge of tenderness in her dismissed as the result of some vague ailment or overexhaustion through exercise. I feared that she would plummet into a state of utter denial, even as her condition became visually evident, although perhaps it would not. Jordan was of a tall, muscular physique, her stomach as rigid as a curve of bone. I could well imagine her having one of those ghostly pregnancies in which a fetus lay so high and far up in the womb that it did not show until the last leg of its residence. As the months went on, Jordan's recurrent symptoms convinced me that this was indeed the case. Yet even my most subtle suggestion of visiting a doctor incited such fits of anger in her that I became suspicious she knew exactly what she suffered. Why Jordan kept it from me, I could only suppose. The child was ill, perhaps, or bound to die, or fathered by someone else. This would have explained the frequent disappearances she had claimed were work trips, the validity of which I could neither prove nor deny. Jordan had never told me what manner of employment kept her so unavailable for a week or some days of every month. She was, in fact, elusive about many aspects of her life, to the point that I knew nothing of her family or birth country, of what friends she kept, or even what animals she tended. I was never allowed into the room they were stored in, the reason for which Jordan would never detail. My frustration and sense of disquiet surrounding her secrecy as to all things, particularly her illness, increased to such maddening proportions that I could think of nothing else. Jordan had always been elusive since the beginning. I found that quality in her attractive. Then her silence like that of some queen in a fairy tale, her dark, solemn eyes changed, then only by lust rather than the quick boil of her anger. I knew that there had been a man she'd loved before me, now cast aside for some unnamed infraction, that she moved frequently, remaining in one city for a year or so. That was all. I'd been unquestioning, intoxicated by the ease of her love, which came without the expectations or demands that had dissolved all of my previous relationships in my unwillingness to exceed. Now I recognized her behavior as the fettering of truth. It disgusted me to consider how I had been misled. When again Jordan declared she must leave me to travel for her ambiguous trade, I attempted from every angle I could think of to convince her to decline the venture and remain home to convalesce. She had on her the wild smell of sweat and unwashed hair, her breaths the short, deep sucking of an attempt to restrain a violent nausea. How Jordan imagined she could work in this condition, I could not fathom. Her denial of reality panicked me to the point that I stood in the doorway of my flat to prevent her from departing to her own abode, insisting that she accept help before her ailment consumed her. I watched Jordan's still face erupt with a sudden fury. She quickly restrained like a subliminal frame in a piece of film, and in almost an instinctual motion I stepped aside from the door so she could pass. "When are you coming back?" I asked, weakly, but she didn't answer, only strode off down the hallway, her hardened shoulders bent slightly in the throes of her condition. The sight of her turned back elicited a dart of fear through me, not for my partner, but for myself. I couldn't identify where it had come from, or where it had begun, for as I felt it, I realized that it had been a germ within me for some time. The following day, the first of that month without Jordan, who had sent word of having left by train in an elusive hour of the morning, I went about my work within a state of restlessness, unable to rid myself of the crawling sense that something in Jordan was misaligned, not right. That it had nothing to do with the child I was convinced we'd made together. I walked home from the office that night, winding by habit down the street on which Jordan lived. The weather was filthy, a knifing horizontal rain that swept beneath the tatters of my umbrella into my mouth, filling it with the taste of iron and tarmac sent up from the road. Through a threadbare quilt of cloud, the moon stared out like the eye of a blind dog, and with its light I saw that Jordan's car was still in the driveway of her house, unmoved since the day before. A pulse of anger that she had lied to me caught me up in its red grasp before the perturbation that had previously haunted me struck in like a second source of wind. I ran up to the door and knocked, unsure if Jordan would answer or if I'd be turned away into the rain. Yet in under a minute she answered, staring at me with a dull, pained resignation. "You didn't go to work," I said redundantly. "Too sick." "Yeah," Jordan muttered, and then she added, "You shouldn't have come." I was startled by how quickly her appearance had declined. The tail of her long, black hair adhered to her back with sickly moisture, her powerful body covered only by an old nitrous, as though she could not bear the inexistent heat. She seemed to stand only by the crutch of her hand on the door, a tangle of veins warming along her forearm. "I'm coming in," I announced, and gently pushed past her into the dark house. Almost at once Jordan twisted aside and pelted upstairs to the bathroom, the lumbering speed of the action throwing me off balance. I went after her, thinking to offer her some comfort and to coax her into seeking medical aid at last. I found Jordan crouched over the toilet bowl, her nightgown slicked to her form like fruit peel with nauseous sweat, her jaws strained open in dry retching motions, her form undulating in the tide of her struggle until it scarcely seemed a thing with joints and more an amorphous suggestion drawn from the dreams of a woman afraid of the change in her. "Jesus," I said, faintly, "let me get you some water." Surely now she couldn't deny my suspicions that it was our child that had made her so ill, I thought. Yet the longer she poured, choking, over the porcelain gripped between her knotted hands, the greater heights to which my nervous doubts crept up like sun-thrown shadows. "Jordan," I said, reaching out to touch the ridge of her shoulder, "tell me what to do. Do you need an ambulance?" At this she wrenched her arm from under my grip, and her strength even in illness amazed me, as did the snarling depth of her voice as she answered, "No, go home, Ryan, go home." There was a strange quality to her words, a rolling timbre as though distorted by the effects of some machine. Drawing back my hand from her, I was appalled to see blood on my palm, and upon her shoulder where I touched it. At the neck of Jordan's nitrous, something odd had affected the skin. It had gathered together, splitting open in a glistening aperture through which I glimpsed a surface that was not muscle. Shouting, I tumbled sideways into the sink, streaking the basin with ropes of dark blood. Jordan's face was hidden in a cave of damp hair. Only when she threw back her head in a yell of agony did I see her face had shifted, both jaws sliding out of her skull like some spontaneous dental malformation. Her eyes, molten with pressure, rolled from the knife cuts of narrowed eye sockets into the basin of water below. I watched in stillness under terror's curse, so close that I felt the humidity of Jordan's wounds upon my face, smelled blood, and the reek of dank animal fur, that which I had seen through the slit in her skin. Her teeth dropped like shattered icicles into the toilet. New pikes of bone pushed down through the cavities of her gums in their place. And then it hit me. What was really going on here? Someone must have decided to snatch up a business opportunity. They weren't selling toys. They were selling nostalgia. Someone had opened up a store called Toys R Us, not caring about copyright infringement, and filled it with 90s and zeros toys. They must be packed when it isn't almost 10 o'clock at night. Wait, why was a toy store open at almost 10 at night? "Welcome to Toys R Us," a voice called out from behind me. I turned to see the store's only cashier, a woman in her late teens or early 20s, very pretty with dark hair in a bun and strands falling around her face. She was wearing one of those choker necklaces that were so popular years ago, giving off a little bit of a goth vibe. "Hi," I called out, giving her a big grin. I was about to ask her if they had any Lisa Frank stuff. I loved that stuff as a kid. But Jess broke me from my thoughts. "Oh my gosh, they have Tamagotchis," she exclaimed, running over to one of the aisles. She picked up one of the keychains in her hand. I always let them die. Maybe this is my chance to redeem myself. "You'll just let it die again," I laughed. "You can't even keep your plants alive." She stuck her tongue out at me. I walked over to the Pokemon display, picking up a booster pack of cards. "This looks like one of the original ones. Don't these go for like $300? "Oh my gosh," Jess said. But the price tag just said $7.99. There were only 2 left, so Jess and I each grabbed one. And then we continued deeper into the store. "Do you remember when Mom went to every store like a madman, looking for a stuffed Vulpix?" I asked. "That was your favorite, and they were sold out everywhere, and she was tearing her hair out trying to find one." "I remember," Jess replied as we walked down the aisle. "She really didn't have to do that. But you were so happy. I remember the grin on your face. You wouldn't let go of that thing for weeks." As we walked, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. The air was warm and damp. I could feel myself start to sweat. I found myself picking up the pace, walking faster towards the end of the aisle. Couldn't really tell you why. Just a feeling, I guess. "Do you want to get anything else?" Jess asked. "I'd love to snag one of those Lisa Frank notebooks, honestly, with the unicorn on it." "What was his name?" "Charlie." She shrugged. "Lisa Frank was your thing, not mine." That was one thing I hated about being an adult. How you were expected to take the color out of everything in your life. And I don't mean that as a metaphor. Everyone wears beige and gray now. Houses are all white and black, sterile and desaturated. Why is it wrong for a 30-year-old woman to have a rainbow unicorn notebook? I mean, not for professional meetings, sure, but at home. Society won't frown upon social media or porn or vaping, but they'll look at you differently the second they see your childish unicorn notebook. F***kid. I was getting that notebook, and it would live on my desk proudly. We made it to the end of the aisle. I looked both ways. The back wall seemed to stretch forever in either direction. The store seemed a lot bigger now that we were inside of it. "Which way?" Jess shrugged. "I have no idea." I glanced over the back wall. Boxes upon boxes of puzzles and games were stacked on each other, like mousetrap and chutes and ladders. I glanced down the aisles, and then I saw a glimpse of the familiar, rainbowy colors peeking out of an aisle several aisles down. "Lisa Frank's over there," I said. But Jess was already walking in the opposite direction, towards a display of Furbies. A shudder went through me. I hated those things. "I'll catch up with you in a second," I said, starting towards Lisa Frank. I speed walked along the back wall, towards the colorful aisle that was calling to me like a chorus of angels. That old, childlike excitement swelled through me as I got close. I couldn't believe how excited I was. Asterisk, I'm a grown woman. Damn it. Asterisk, But that's the power of nostalgia, I guess. When I got there, however, I stopped dead. There were notebooks and folders and plushies, all right. Except, there was something horribly wrong with them. In front of me, there was a notebook featuring the familiar Lisa Frank yellow Labradors. But their eyes weren't brown. They were pure white, with just a single dot in each eye for the pupil, and their mouths were open to reveal multiple rows of razor-sharp teeth. And the unicorn notebook I so desired. Its rainbow horn was covered in bright red liquid, as if it had just gored someone. What the asterisk? How are they selling this to children? I grabbed one of the rainbow leopard plushies off the shelves. One of its eyes was missing, replaced with a single white button. It reminded me of the mascots from Five Nights at Freddy's. Deteriorated, damaged, taken over by something else entirely. I ran out of the aisle and down the back wall again, calling for Jess. As I did, though, I saw the games more clearly. The mousetrap game showed a real-life mouse getting decapitated as kids watch, their mouths open with laughter. There was a game called Stab Your Dad, which showed a hand being pierced by dozens of tiny little needles, and a variant of Operation, which showed a drawing of children cutting into a real corpse. I broke into a sprint and finally found Jess, holding a gray Furby. "We've got to get out of here," I panted. "I know." She held out the Furby to me, and now I heard its little voice, repeating the same 3 words over and over. "I am watching you. I am watching you." She tossed it back on the shelf, and the two of us hurried towards the exit, not breaking into a run in case that prompted the cashier, or someone else, to chase us. But as soon as we left the aisle, the air shifted. Something felt different. The air pressure, the temperature, the lighting. Noise bubbled in as though we'd just surfaced from underwater. What the hell? Sunlight streamed through the windows. The store was packed. Women in jeans and windbreakers chased after little kids toddling through the store. Laughter and squeals of delight filled the aisles. Jess turned to me, mouth hanging open. "You can go back, if you'd like." I wheeled around to see the goth girl from earlier standing behind us, right behind us. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. "Time isn't set in stone. You can go back to the way things were." At this distance, I realized she wasn't as young as I'd thought. Her makeup caked into fine lines around her eyes, and she had a few strands of silver hair poking out at her temples. Our age, or a little older. Someone who was forged in the 90s like us. Red clouds floated sporadically in the water, with bodies visible below. One close by, near our end of the pool, looked like it had a huge cape billowing behind it as it floated through the water. A moment later, I realized it was the remains of the body's skin, not quite separated all the way. I wanted to puke right in the pool then and there, looking away to try and abate my disgust. Didn't work too well, considering I hurled right onto the floor within seconds. The people in the pool at least seemed to be dead, not taking any kind of notice we were there. We hurried through the pool room, coming out in a small maintenance area situated behind it. Pumps and tanks hummed, with water beginning to slosh from a small overflow. As we walked through, I caught sight of one of the filtration systems, someone's face caught in the screen vertebrae. I'm not sure who they were before, but a little bit of hair was clinging to the scalp, empty eye sockets screaming out as the water pulled it to and fro. I shivered, turning away and continuing down the back hallway, toward a maintenance elevator some of the service guys used. "Should be a lift somewhere around here," Mick mumbled, moving down the hallway steadily, making sure to check gun first around every corner. A loud bang came from the maintenance room behind us, something hitting the door before scraping along the metal floors, coming closer to us. Mick swore, ushering me to move faster behind him. I made the mistake of looking back. There, in the dim lights of maintenance, a skinless man was making his way toward us, brandishing something that was already glistening with blood, much like him. The screech he let out was inhuman, and I could see tendon and muscle stretching on his face in the eerie light as he did. Turning, I powered on behind Mick as he ran ahead, desperately searching for the maintenance lift. Eventually it appeared on our left, and he smashed the button so many times I'm surprised it didn't just pop right off. The lift began moving, slowly coming down. The sign above it flashed 6, coming down slowly to where we were at floor 1. Time slowed to an eternity as the skinless man made his way down the hallway, getting closer with every agonizing step he took. Mick pushed me aside, raising his gun and firing off one shot, hitting the thing in the center mass. It stumbled, rasping for a moment, but got back up. It didn't seem like the first one took much back in the common area, but I don't know if they're all different. It just kept coming at us, now screaming louder as it got closer, like it was trying to signal to the others around the station. Looking back at the lift, it was only down to floor 4 by this point. Not good. Mick let off another shot, this time aiming for the head and hitting his target right in the left eye. Part of the thing's skull blew away, exposing brain as skull fragments were blasted off. The brain moved. Swear to God, I thought I was crazy at first, but the huge hole that was just torn in this thing's head was teeming, moving every which was like it was itself in pain. The way it was moving reminded me of how shellfish look when they're still alive, moving in like a fluid way, but very obviously out of their environment, struggling to live. Either way, it was making things difficult for the body, which started to trip and stumbled every which way into the walls around it. Ding! Fluorescent lights welcomed us into the lift, and we both nearly threw ourselves against the back wall, desperate to get as far away as possible from that. I pressed the 8, putting us all the way to the top where the captain's quarters and communications room would be situated. I had seen it when we got on boarded a while back. They gave us this huge tour of the ship and explained where everything was done. The main ship officers would be up here, able to give us an idea of what the hell was going on and how we could get out of here. Everything was about to get better. Just have to keep telling myself that. I don't even believe the lie. As the lift goes up further, Mick checks his gun, taking stock. He looks to me after reloading the magazine. 6 left. Save one for me if things go bad up here, please, I asked, nodding. He gave an affirmative, flashing 2 fingers. Smart. 1 for him, 1 for me. The door opened, making us think that those 2 bullets might be our best bet at this point. There was nobody visible on the main bridge, just the massive glass dome that gave a view of the vast empty all around us. Space, dark as could be, with Pluto floating off one way, the sun blazing like a far-off paradise a long ways past it, and the big, dark abyss beyond it. Smeared on the glass going toward the captain's chambers was dark red blood, already dried on the cold window. A handprint that showed someone was either grasping for support or being dragged away against their will, streaking along the cold panel and through the doorway. We walked over to one of the doors on the far side, leading to the communications room. That was our best bet after all, opposed to what may be waiting in the quarters on the opposite side. Nothing in here seemed out of place. Most of it was still pristine. Monitors on, measurements coming through constantly that checked on the outpost's oxygen and other important functions. I made my way to a terminal, looking through to find what I was after. Thankfully, I spent most of my off time playing around with the comms in this place, figuring out how to get messages out past the pretty strict censors they had on our internet. Can't have people knowing there's a secret rich people resort out past Pluto after all, especially when nobody even thinks FTL travel is possible at this point. God, if I make it back to Earth, I'm either getting rich off spilling these beans or getting put in the damned loony bin. Maybe both. There. The comms began to light up as I placed a call back to Earth HQ, the asteriskers that ran this entire shit show. You're through, Eden. What can we help you with? A voice came over the other line. Oh, thank a asterisk. Mick swore, making whoever was on the other line yelp a little. Not very professional, Eden. You're usually a bit nicer when you call. She responded, indignant. Look, professional is the last thing on our minds right now. There's a big problem up here. I said, talking over Mick, who was getting ready to swear at her again. "Who is this?" she asked again. "You don't sound like Lynn." "Where's he?" "Man, if I knew, I'd put him on. Like I said, we have problems up here and need someone to come get us." I said again, "Something happened. People have gone crazy. It's a bloodbath." "A bloodbath? You can't be serious." "How?" she asked again. Jesus Christ, just talking to her made me want to just get Mick to shoot me. He piped up then. "Listen here, ma'am. I know your fat ass back on Earth ain't worried about what's happening outside your atmosphere, but we're in real danger here. People are killing each other." Mick was going off. I almost wanted to cheer for him at this point, but he continued, "Now, you either put me on with someone higher up that can get us a rescue ship, or you get your ass on one and fly up here yourself, understood?" The line went dead for a second. I legitimately thought he had just made this woman hang up, killing our hopes of getting a ride out of here. It continued on for another few minutes, dead air coming through in statusy bursts as radiation through space, and countless thousands of miles interrupted the signal. After a moment, a man's voice came over the line. "This better be King good," he said, sounding like he was already fed up with us. "What's happening up there that you're waking me up? Who the heck are you?" Mick spat out now. "Oh God, here we go. Now it's just going to become an argument instead of a rescue. CEO Mitchell Farmer of Eden Excursions, who the heck are you?" He spat back. It took everything I had not to stop a groan escaping when I heard his name. God knows this rich asshole wasn't going to listen. "Mick Sperry, guard on your shitkin of a resort. There are people up here tearing each other's skin off and killing everyone. We need to get the hell out of here." Mick was shouting now. I looked back, unsure of if he would attract any more of the skinless ones. "You sure?" The voice was more sober, serious now. "How many of you are still alive?" "Me and this kid." "That's it, far as I know," Mick mentioned. "Look, I never saw shit like this, and I've been in war zones. The hell is going on?" "Not sure. Listen, I'm very sorry about what's happened to you. Hope you find a way out. Have a great day," he said. Honestly, if I expected any better from someone with the CEO title, I would probably be pretty mad. As it stands, though, I'm unsurprised and more focused on how the hell I'm going to get myself out of this mess. The line went dead, nobody on the other end anymore. "Shittin' me," Mick whispered, moving to the console and pressing a few buttons, waving me aside. The call wouldn't go through again, though, instead being immediately picked up and denied. They're just going to forget about us and go on like ain't shit happened. Great. So we get killed by one of those things or die from old age, starvation, disease, whatever, I said, slumping down and rubbing my eyes. Everything was catching up to me now. My entire body ached from falling over in that blood puddle earlier, and I was absolutely filthy. "There are emergency ships, right? There's one emergency transport ship. Yeah, that might work," he said, standing up and typing something in on the console. After a moment of mumbling to himself and crouching over it, he stood up straight. "It's docked and set right now. Needs at least vice captain clearance to let it loose, though." I looked at him for a moment, both of us communicating something neither wanted to speak. As I looked back toward the captain's quarters, the blood smeared on the glass seemed to reflect the light of billions of stars outside, confirming my fears that we would need to go in there. All right, if it's our only option," I said, standing now and walking over to the comms doorway. He stood, following and drawing his gun once more. I flashed 2 fingers at him. "Just remember, save 2. He nodded, taking point and moving across the bridge quickly. We paused in front of the captain quarters, taking a deep breath before he kicked the door in, going in, gun drawn and leveled in front of him. Moments after he went in, I entered behind, hearing his words right as the stench hit me. Holy Death was thick in the air here. the heavy metallic scent of blood mixing with the more biting odors of excrement. There was blood smeared all over the walls, with tatters of flesh hanging from the ceiling as we stepped through. I could hear something coming from the room up ahead, a tearing noise along with deep, guttural grunting. Mick kept his gun trained in front as I grabbed a bottle from a nearby table. It was thick glass, though still half full of some kind of spirit. It took a lot to resist taking a swig then and there, but I didn't want it to slosh around and give us away. I held on to it tight though, waiting to take a swing at anything that may come. As we approached the doorway, I could see further into the room beyond. All the lights had been covered with strips and swathes of human skin, casting an eerie red glow over everything around. There was one person sitting in the middle of the room, skinless just like all the others. Other skinless bodies were scattered around, and in front of the sitting one was another, still having its own outer layer removed bit by bit. Mick accidentally bumped a table, making a cup tip over and shatter on the floor. The skinless sitting in the middle of the room turned, eyes bulging bright against exposed muscle on its face, and screamed, leaping forward at Mick, who fired off a shot. It fell back momentarily, squirming at the bullet now lodged somewhere in its chest. I could tell Mick was trying to be careful with his shots, considering there was a relatively large window on the opposite side of the room. I took my moment, stepping forward toward the skinless one, and hitting it with the bottle right over the head, causing it to shatter as I did. It screamed as strong alcohol hit the bare muscle and nerves, unguarded thanks to the skin being peeled off. I still had hold of the neck of the bottle though, now ending in a nice jagged shard of glass, and ran it down one more time, tearing through his eye and making him go still for a moment. I pulled it back out, readying for another strike, but could see the squirming of something from behind the eye socket. The brain in this one was moving around erratically, just like the one downstairs, desperately trying to get out despite the harsh environment. Jesus asterisk, Mick whispered, looking around the room at everything. I couldn't help but agree with his sentiment once I took everything in as well. There was drawing on the walls with blood. It was like some asterisked up futuristic cave drawings. Red viscera smeared in the images of people watching as a massive planet passed above them in the distance. Small stick figures looking on in awe, but further down the wall the planet passing over suddenly had this thing drawn inside it. The entire planet picture was filled in with viscera and blood to color it. But right in the middle there was more focus, something like a mass at the core slumbering. Oh holy shit, I whispered, pieces of the puzzle fitting together in my head. Charon did this. The moon? Mick asked, still looking around the room. He was going over tables and looking in the pockets of any clothes he found laying around, desperately trying to find the key card we could use for the emergency ship. My gums started to ache. My back itched constantly, especially at night. When I looked in the mirror, my own eyes seemed different, darker, with flecks of amber starting to bloom in the irises. I blamed it on jet lag, on the unfamiliar food, on anything but what it really was. The house itself seemed alive at night. The locked cellar door that no one would discuss. The way the local villagers crossed themselves when we passed by. The strange, coppery smell that permeated the halls after sunset, like old pennies or fresh blood. And the sounds. God, the sounds. Wet, slithering noises in the walls, scratching above the ceiling. And sometimes, what sounded like distant screaming. My new heightened senses made it all unbearable. It was on the 5th night that my own transformation began. I was following Susanna, my curiosity finally overwhelming my growing dread. The moon was full, casting everything in a sickly white light. From my window, I watched her walk into the banana grove behind the house, her white nightgown ghostly against the dark foliage. She stopped in a clearing and began to twitch. The sight should have horrified me. Instead, I felt a deep resonance, as if my own body was remembering something ancient and terrible. I watched, transfixed, as a wet, tearing sound split the night, like someone ripping apart raw chicken. Susanna's torso separated from her waist, intestines dangling like obscene ribbons, glistening in the moonlight. Wings erupted from her back in a spray of dark fluid, unfurling like some hellish butterfly emerging from its chrysalis. When she turned, her face was no longer human. Her jaw had distended, filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth, and her eyes glowed like hot coals in a dead fire. My own spine cracked audibly as I watched. The itching in my back had become unbearable, and I could feel something moving beneath my skin, pressing outward. I stumbled backward, knocking over a vase, and the crash brought instant silence. Then the sound of wings. Susanna floated through my window, her intestines swaying gently like seaweed in a current. Behind her, 3 more figures rose into view, her mother, grandmother, and aunt, all in the same horrific state of bifurcation. Their lower halves stood like empty clothes in the clearing, while their torsos floated on massive, leathery wings. The air filled with that chittering laughter I'd been hearing in my dreams, the same sound that had been building in my own throat. "The change is already starting," she said, her voice a raspy version of its usual melody. "We've been feeding you our essence for days. In our saliva, in our food, in every kiss. We're Manananggal, Aswang, the hungry ones. It runs in the family, passed from mother to daughter, and sometimes to those we choose to keep." Through the window, I could see her family members floating in the yard, their eyes burning in the darkness. Alina called out, "The final transformation must be shared through a ritual as old as these islands. Not all survive it, of course, but Susanna thinks you're strong enough. The fact that you're still alive after drinking our essence proves it." "I don't want to lose you," Susanna whispered, her inhuman face inches from mine. "And I don't want to have to kill you. Please don't make me choose. You're already halfway there. Can't you feel it?" I could. My teeth were lengthening, pushing outward. The skin along my spine was splitting, and I could feel something wet and membranous trying to spread. I looked at her clawed hand, then at her face, that strange mixture of the woman I loved and something ancient and horrifying. 2 years of love and trust warred with primal terror, but then I remembered all the little things that now made sense. Her strange hours, her intense protectiveness, the way she always seemed to know when danger was near. The way small animals disappeared whenever she visited me in the States. Something moved in the cellar window. A pale face pressed against the glass, mouth open in a silent scream. I thought of the missing villagers, the strange meat at dinner, the screams in the night. Yet even that knowledge didn't repulse me anymore. Instead, I felt a new hunger stirring. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice changing even as I spoke, becoming something inhuman. She smiled, revealing rows of teeth that went far too far back into her head. "Now we complete what we started. The ritual requires preparation, and I'm sure you must be very hungry by now." As she led me outside to her waiting family, my skin began to split along my waist. Had I made a terrible mistake? Or was I about to become something magnificent and terrible? Either way, as Susanna's family circled above me like vultures, their wings blotting out the stars, I realized it was far too late to change my mind. In the distance, a rooster crowed, but dawn seemed impossibly far away. Susanna's grandmother descended, carrying something that writhed in her clawed hands. The smell of fresh meat made my new teeth ache with anticipation. "Let's begin," she said, her voice thick with hunger. "And remember, dear James, try to scream quietly. We wouldn't want to wake the neighbors, though soon enough, you'll be the one doing the hunting." As they closed in around me, their shadows merging into one, I couldn't tell if the pounding I heard was my heart or drums from the village, a death knell or a celebration. Perhaps both. Susanna's eyes met mine, filled with equal parts love and predatory anticipation, and I realized that sometimes love means not just accepting all parts of someone, but becoming something entirely new yourself. The transformation was already burning through my body like acid in my veins. Whether this rebirth would be my salvation or destruction remained to be seen. But as my spine began to split and wings pushed through my shoulders, I found myself smiling with teeth that were no longer my own. I'm trapped on a luxury space station. The guests have started skinning themselves. Run. Keep running. Don't stop. Don't you dare stop. Come on, Sully. You've got to get through this. I can hear them even over my heavy footsteps on the metal grates. My friends, neighbors, coworkers on this stupid tin coffin floating through space reduced to this. There was no way out either. Just them, or the cold void outside this vessel. I'm dying no matter where I end up. These damn things will get to me. The RSS Eden, a getaway space station sitting along the edge of the solar system, has been in operation for a few months now. Last night we were due to have our first ever planetary flyby, with Pluto finally reaching us on its revolution. Big event, and of course I had to asterisk king work. God forbid we let everyone on the station see it, but me and some of the other kitchen crew ended up feeding everyone after some creative scheduling from the boss. Figures, even at the edge of the damn solar system, workers get exploited. Everyone else got to set up on the station bridge, with an unobstructed view of the horizon, reaching all the way to the sun at the middle. Apparently the pass was pretty quick, there and gone like a car passing on the highway. Not that I would know, considering we were stealing a smoke break in the walk-in. Kind of hard to go outside for one when you're millions of miles from an inhabitable atmosphere, so gotta take it where you can. The rest of the night all I heard was bragging from those that got to see Charon orbiting around Pluto as it passed by. All the rich assholes that didn't have to work to keep their place up here talking about how amazing it was, how when you see them up close they're like massive glaciers, floating through space. Apparently there was even a comet trailing not too far off as well, just adding to the show. Must be nice. A couple of them even said it looked like they could see through the ice, a massive shadow of the planet itself visible thanks to the light. Honestly, the rest of the night was uneventful. We closed the kitchen down, had a few drinks, and all went back to our rooms before we had to be back for prep the next day. I was asleep for, I don't know honestly, maybe a couple of hours. Then the screams woke me up. I could hear banging all along the corridor outside, punctuated by shrieks of terror and pain. My first thought was that some drunk guest started shit with one of our people. Hell, probably Jane, down the hall getting caught with another guest's wife, so now they want revenge. There was every attempt to rationalize it, but the screams told a different story. The last few hours have been a total blur. I stayed in my room as long as I could, the screams holding out the entire time, the sounds of heavy footfalls everywhere. But eventually I started to smell smoke. It began seeping in through the cracks in the door. Something had caught, and the fire was spreading fast. I had to leave. I had to cover my hand with an old shirt just to pull the door handle, and a rush of heat met me as soon as it opened. Fire on my left, a clear path to my right, with screams echoing from beyond the corridor's curve. Not much of a choice where to go, so I started to run, heading into the screams in favor of burning alive. Beyond the crew living quarters there was a small common area. Not too much, but a few couches, a TV with a few gaming consoles and movies, ping pong, and a couple of microwaves. Pretty standard stuff, except when I entered now it had been given a fresh paint job of deep, deep scarlet. There had to be gallons of blood, spread and splattered all over the room, with no care to where it landed. The floor was slick with it, almost totally covered in a thin layer that squelched with every step. All of this blood, yet no body in sight. Were they taken somewhere else? Devoured? What the asterisk is going on? I could hear another scream from further down the corridor, exiting the crew quarters and moving into the resort area. We had probably 24 guests on board right now, as it gotten to all of them. Where the hell are all of my coworkers at? No, don't worry about that yet, all in time. Worry about finding out what the hell is going on here first. It took a few to get through the common area, stepping carefully so as not to slip in the slick layer of blood on the floor. When I finally made it, footprints trailing from the common area to the resort guided me to my next destination. Hopefully, whoever left them was still alive. but the red tracks began to fade after a while, leaving me guessing again. There were smears of red sporadically along the wall, but nothing to denote where everyone had gone off to. The screams from before only echoed sporadically now, with the large open area of the resort only making their whereabouts unclear. The sun was shining in the distance outside the viewing window, a brilliant lighthouse in the void of space. A low growl broke the silence, making me nearly jump out of my skin. Thanks to the viewing window, everything here was brightly lit, even the doorway leading further in toward the guest rooms. The shining light poured in through the door, illuminating a lone figure walking toward the viewing area. I resisted whatever urges I had to shout out at it, instead backing up to hide behind one of the chairs. Whoever it was, they let out a gurgling noise, like they were trying to rinse their throat, but just couldn't get it back out. When they finally stepped into the viewing room, I finally got a clear look. I don't know who they were originally. Any defining features were gone, ripped away along with every inch of skin on their body. Completely naked, glistening in the sunlight coming through, muscle and ligaments were the only thing visible on their body, all moving in a grotesque mechanism to guide them closer to me. Every muscle, every tendon, the slightest movements were bare to the naked eye. As they moved closer, blood smearing along the floor as they walked. Despite my best efforts to not make a sound, a small scream escaped my throat, alerting the skinned creature. It snapped to, facing toward me with lifeless eyes twitching in the exposed sockets. For a brief moment it gurgled, staring in my direction, before taking off toward me. Limbs were flailing wildly at its side as it ran, closing the distance between us with next to no effort, while I was slipping just trying to find some semblance of safety. I fell in the slick viscera, struggling to get back up as the life force below me slipped and splashed. It just got closer, bearing down on me, blood steadily dripping from the stripped muscles as teeth bared above me. God, why? What the asterisk was happening? It lifted a hand toward me, fingertips of sharpened bone ready to peel my skin off, making me just like it. Bang! The thing fell off, writhing on the ground next to me. In the doorway ahead, one of the security guards was standing, gun raised to fire at the thing again, as I struggled to stand, holding hands above my head as he aimed at me next. Whoa, I'm not like that, I said, looking down at the writhing creature and sliding my way further from it. He just stared at me, gun leveled right at my center mass and finger on the trigger. Anyone alive back that way? He said, pointing to the direction I had just come from. I shook my head. There's a fire taking the place over. Probably need to seal it off before it spreads. I said, not that any of us could do that. It required management level clearance just to run the damn garbage ejector, much less seal off an entire damn wing of this place. That fire would have all of us making a decision soon, either burn to death or contend with rapid depressurization in the cold void outside. Rasping next to me nearly made me jump before I realized it was the damn thing laying on the ground a few feet away now. I wasn't going to wait and asterisk around with that, and looked over to the guy, motioning to the skinless being nearby. Not to be ungrateful or anything, but can we get away from this? The guard lowered his gun, motioning for me to come with him. Quietly, we went down the hall toward the spa area. I was just following him at this point, hoping he knew what the hell was going on here. But I get the feeling he's as in the dark as I am. I'm Sully, I said, breaking the silence and looking toward him. I extended a hand, withdrawing it once I got an actual look and realized I was covered in blood from my fall earlier. He only grunted. Mick. So, is there anyone else alive? What the hell's going on? I asked. Everybody went asterisk king crazy, was his only response. I don't know. I just clocked in around 3 this morning for my shift. Then some asshole comes running by, holding a knife he probably stole from the kitchen, taking parts of his skin off. Jesus, I whispered under my breath. Have you found anyone else? Just you so far. He mumbled, checking around a corner to see if anyone was lying in wait. We go through here and head up, it'll put us up near the bridge. Gonna call in for help. Dude, it's going to take way too long for any kind of help to get up here. We're literally at the edge of space. I said, getting a little loud now. It's setting in that if things are this bad, that means we're not going to have long alone up here. God knows how many of the staff and guests are like this now. How many of them have you seen so far? Dozen or so. Couple in the process of skinning themselves, I guess. Found some going at it with a pair of scissors, one of them snipping away at the other, like it was some crafts project. Found another one just going to town with fingernails, bringing their own skin off in little bits piece by piece. Okay, I'm gonna stop you there. I might throw up, I said. Seeing the skinned person was one thing, but hearing about how they got that way has my skin crawling. He was describing it so damn casually too. Sorry, spent some time in war zones, so I forget I'm a little numb, he mumbled again. We turned a corner into the pool room. Olympic size, all the way up here at the edge of the solar system. And nobody living to swim in it. Not that it was up to standard anyway, I realized as we stepped in. Then, silence. Complete, suffocating silence. At first, I thought it was just the absence of sound, the stillness of the world around me. But as the seconds stretched, I realized something far worse. The silence wasn't natural. It felt wrong, almost painful. My ears rang with a pressure I couldn't shake off, as though something was crushing my eardrums from the inside. The toddler's cries, the rumble of the ground, even my panicked breaths, all of it was gone. My body trembled, but I couldn't hear the shaking. The world had gone mute, not from the absence of sound, but from its crushing weight, as if the air had become so thick that sound could no longer travel. I watched in horror as the gas station sign bent, snapping like a twig under an invisible force. The woman clutched her child, her mouth open in a silent scream. The older man's cane snapped in half as he collapsed. The young man's car crumpled like paper, swallowed whole by the void. I dropped to my knees, pressing my hands against my ears in a futile attempt to stop the pressure. But the silence was not something I could escape. I closed my eyes momentarily, trying to breathe and think of Rachel, my daughter. The things I hadn't done, the moments I hadn't shared. Maybe this was it. Perhaps this was the end. But even as the darkness closed in, I could still remember them, my family. The ones I'd failed to love enough to hold close. I let go. Culture shock. The first time Susanna's saliva dripped into my morning coffee, I didn't notice. I was too busy admiring the way the Filipino sunrise painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold, too distracted by how beautiful she looked preparing breakfast on the veranda of her family's colonial home. When she kissed me on the cheek and watched me drink, her amber eyes seemed to glow with an intensity I attributed to love. I should have known something was wrong weeks before, when she first invited me to meet her family in the Philippines. 2 years of long-distance dating, and she'd only ever agreed to video chat at dawn or dusk, Manila time. The nightmares started immediately after I booked my flight. Vivid dreams of flesh tearing like wet paper, of wings unfurling from human backs, of hearts still beating in open air. I blamed travel anxiety, even when I woke up tasting copper. The village outside Quezon City was exactly as she described it. Lush, humid, with houses nestled between banana trees and birds of paradise. What she hadn't mentioned was the emptiness. No children playing in the streets, no neighbors chatting across fences. Even the stray dogs kept their distance from the family home. Though I swore I could hear them howling at night, their cries cutting off abruptly mid-wail. Her mother, Elena, greeted me with an embrace that made my skin prickle. She held me too long, her nose tracing a line from my collar to my ear, inhaling deeply. I felt like a wine being sampled, assessed for its bouquet. "Welcome, James," she said, her accent thick, but her English perfect. "We've heard so much about you." Behind her stood Susanna's grandmother and 2 aunts, all of them tall and elegant like my girlfriend, with the same high cheekbones and unusual amber eyes. They watched me with an intensity that made my skin crawl, like cats tracking a wounded bird. Later, I would understand they were watching to see if the change had begun. Those first few days, I noticed my sense of smell growing sharper. Every morning and evening, they prepared elaborate meals, always insisting on serving me themselves, always watching me eat with those predatory smiles. The meat had a strange, gamey flavor I couldn't place, and sometimes I could swear it was still warm, as if it had been alive moments before reaching my plate. Each bite made me feel stranger, more alert, more hungry. And then, hours later, the doors unlocked. We stepped out. I am not ashamed to admit that in the wordless silence, I reached for Dr. Khan's hand, and he took it, and hand in hand we proceeded down the hall. My own instinct was to flee, but I knew that Dr. Khan's was the same as it had always been, to help his patient, and he led me away from the facility doors, towards the room in which Kenji had been tested on. We came, first, upon the body of one of the two Japanese scientists, dead, pierced, and torn apart, his hand still held, now grotesquely, a handgun. His eyes had been pushed into their sockets and a bloody document folder placed upon his chest. Dr. Khan picked it up, thumbed through it, and passed it to me. Inside was the identity's true identity. He was not a Japanese scientist, but a member of the NICO, the Japanese intelligence agency. I put the folder back on his chest, and we continued forward. The facility had been visibly damaged. Doors were dented, some of the lights were off or flickering. We heard then a sound, as if a deep rumbling. Dr. Khan motioned for me to stop. We had rounded a corner and were at the beginning of a long corridor. At the other end, into a kind of gloom, rolled suddenly what I can describe only as an ossified half-human ball, except that I knew it could not be made of bone, because teeth are not bones, and this ball was constructed of a spherical latticework of long, thin white teeth, somewhere in the midst of which was Kenji's body. It appeared to me only as a contained darkness. The teeth, I noted, seemed to originate no longer solely in his mouth, but from everywhere on his body, although given the complexity of the spiraling, winding, penetrating network of fangs, which had pierced his body innumerable times, it was impossible to state with certainty where any one tooth began, or what the resulting creature even was. Surely, Kenji the man must be dead, I thought. But this new thing was alive. Kenji, Dr. Khan said, I can help you. And the ball started rolling. Dr. Khan smiled warmly, but the ball, although slow at first, began to pick up speed, and soon was rushing towards us with such velocity that I leaped to the side and plastered my back against the wall. You may call it cowardice, but to me it was the instinct of self-preservation, an instinct Dr. Khan either did not share or had overcome, because I hadn't even had the time to yell his name before Kenji the sphere crashed into him, impaling him on a myriad of spear-like teeth and continuing into and through the wall at the head of the corridor. One man impaled on the other, and with each sickening rotation, Dr. Khan's body was pulverized further into human sludge. I realized I had been holding my breath and let it out, gasped for air. I screamed. Then I set out after them, following, for reasons I still cannot explain, the unhindered destruction and viscous trail of flesh. A few minutes later, I found myself having entered a dark conference room, in the corner of which sat Dr. Ochimori, slouched against the walls. He was holding a long knife with which he had just finished disemboweling himself. His spilled innards still steamed, and his eyes, although moving slowly, set their gaze firmly upon me, and in slow, slurred speech he said, "End yourself now, before you too become of him." He died with a cold, rational grimace on his face that left his small, yellowed teeth exposed, dripping with pinkish blood. And here, I think now, was the last true human. Determined to follow the path of death to its very end, I stepped through a broken-down wall into some kind of office in which Kenji the sphere had come to rest. A few parts of Dr. Khan were still stuck to the exterior of his dental shell, but the shell itself was now completed, solid. I could no longer see between the individual teeth to the darkness that was Kenji inside. Speaking seemed foolish, so I said nothing. I simply watched, listening to the groaning and grinding sounds that filled the room as Kenji's teeth, having melded together into one surface, continued to grow, to push one against each other in the absence of empty space, and then to crack, audibly first, then visibly, the first fracture appearing at the top of the sphere, before following a jagged line downwards until the rift was completed and the shell fragments fell away, revealing a single already expanding unity that I could not, even in the brief moment when its entirety was before me, before it expanded forever beyond the pathetic, human scope of my visual comprehension, fail to comprehend. From 1,000 textbooks, through 1,000 microscopes, I knew it. It was life. A cell. A solitary cell. Growing fantastically. Something in it caused all this. I began before Mick cut me off again with a loud shout of victory. He was holding up the keycard, showing me the surly captain's face printed right on it. I can't help but think that's who was lying here on the ground beside me, responsible for this fucked up little remodel with skin all over the walls. To be honest with you, Sully, I don't care what caused this. I care about getting the hell out of here, he said. The man spoke sense, even in the middle of this hell that looked like Ed Gein's wet dream. I nodded. We weren't able to leave the room before Captain came back, screaming as the thing in his head suddenly began to leak out. It wasn't a brain anymore, if that's what it was in the first place. This thing was round, gray like brain matter, but slithering along the ground like a sea creature desperate to find a new puddle to live in. Mick lifted his gun, firing at it. It split, pieces moving faster toward bodies on the floor and propped on the walls. No, don't shoot anything else, I said, pulling on his arm and running to the door. Every body touched by part of the thing suddenly began to jerk and move around, writhing on the ground as they began to stand to their feet. Each one was letting out a low rasp, guttural sounds like they were learning to speak for the first time. Mick caught the hint and started running, clutching the keycard as they began limping after us, skin still hanging off of some in strips and patches. I swear they were all smiling as they came after us. Maybe it was just the exposed teeth in their cheeks making it look that way, but their evil grins almost had me frozen in fear. We made our way to the lift, desperately pressing to open the door on it again. As it did, we clambered in once more, slamming the door shut by pounding on the button until it actually cracked. The skinless were just feet away when the ding finally came, their barren grins disappearing as the doors came together tight, sealing them out. I hate it here, I said, bending over to grab my knees and try to stop myself from puking again. Sour bile in my throat was the only answer, acid burning on my tongue as I nearly choked. Mick gave me a pat on the back as I stood, wiping my mouth. We're getting out of here, one way or another, he said. 5 left. I nodded as the elevator dinged down, looking at our destination. We came up from floor 1, but there was a garage level just below us, and that's where we were headed. The emergency ship would be there, already gassed up and prepared for any type of medical or personal event that may require someone to be shuttled through space at a little over light speed to get back to Earth. Now it was just a matter of getting to it without setting off every skinless asshole in this place. No such luck for us. The door opened with a ding on the basement level, giving us a full view of the garage area. I could see the windows on either side, giving us a clear view beyond as the emergency transport sat there in the hangar, skinless bodies milling around it. Stars were shining in the distance, taunting us that we were never going to get out of there. The ding of the elevator was all they needed to turn in our direction, every single one of the damn things focusing right on us. Run, Mick told me. I took off, going to the right and hoping to get some distance between myself and those things. Mick ran to the left, trying to draw them off with a gunshot. 4 left now. They all began milling toward him instead of me, so I was able to try and take a stealthier approach, hiding behind shipping containers and other transport crates, to make my way to the emergency vehicle. There was one damned one, though, who was just, I don't know, broken. He wasn't following Mick, but was instead just waiting for me in the shadows of a shipping container close by. When I walked by, it jumped out, grabbing me by the arm. I could feel sharpened finger bones digging into my skin, scratching and running furrows through it, drawing blood right near my elbow. I screamed, kicking at it to no avail. The claws dug in further, with another hand reaching for me to render more of my skin from the rest of my body. I made a desperate plunge forward, feeling the claws in my elbow tear even deeper, shredding muscle, now as I let out a scream of pain. It was enough, though, and I made it far enough away that I was able to break out of its grasp, though I believe it took some of my flesh with it. Mick was on the other side of the hangar still, mobbed by at least 6 of the damned creatures when he shot off another bullet, popping one right in the head. 3 left. I could see the writhing mass as it stumbled forward, knocking into one of the others, and nearly sticking to it. The bodies began to almost congeal together as they made contact, forming into this unholy mass of blood, muscle, and bone that was still trying to get to Mick. Finally, I was at the ship, but he was still at least 36 yards away. I heard him yell my name as I ran forward, trying to find some way to help him out of the deadly predicament. As I got closer, though, I saw him hold up the metal key card with the captain's face on it, motioning for me to catch. I haven't seen anyone throw a card like that since Gambit in old X-Men cartoons, but damn, his aim was good. I was able to catch it as it whizzed through the air nearby, coming right toward me. The mass of bodies was pressing in closer to him as I turned back, intending to get the doors open so he could make a run. I swiped it by the ID reader, opening the small side door and stepping in, turning back to look for him. The bodies kept running into each other and congealing, all mixing into one massive being, arms and heads all waving wildly, while screaming in an unholy chorus. One arm had his leg, another was exposing claws that were being sunk into his back now, and no matter how many times he tried to break free, it was useless. One hand lost a grip, 2 more took its place, keeping him bogged down. I was in the doorway of the ship, screaming for him to get over here so we could just close the door. Instead, he started moving the other way, further down toward the hangar door. "Close it, dumbass," he shouted at me now. I didn't want to, though. I had only known the guy a few hours, but he had already saved my ass countless times. No way I was just going to leave him to this skinless chimera that kept grabbing hold of him now. He screamed again, claws rending the flesh of his shoulder, causing blood to spray out over the amalgamation of bodies. They almost delighted in it, dancing as the blood hit them. Mick raised his gun toward the hangar window, shouting again. Now. Pop. 2 shots left. The hangar window cracked a little where the bullet hit, a small chip appearing in it. This stuff was thick, though, and wasn't going to give easy. Pop. 1 shot left. Our deal was off, I guess. My arm stung, pain searing from my elbow outward as I hit the button inside the ship, closing myself into the small shuttle. The spider web began to spread on the glass, moving quickly through the long pane toward either end. Once it broke, this ship would probably be pulled right through, out into the void of space. Hopefully, it held together long enough to let me set up the autopilot back home. Pop. The last shot did it, hitting right on one of the already branching fractals of the cracking glass. Mick let out a cheer as another of the amalgamation's hands ripped at his throat, causing another blood shower to come down, finally killing the man that had saved me barely hours ago. His last deed was enough, because before I knew what was happening, the glass gave in to the pressure differential inside and outside, bursting into millions of shards that spread out among the stars in space. Every single body in that hangar was ripped out. Though the ship didn't budge, I was still sitting securely on the hangar port, watching as the amalgamation of bodies was thrown far, far away, reaching toward the farthest void of space, floating the opposite direction of the sun. Eventually, I stopped looking. Mick's body must have been torn apart immediately when the window came down, because I couldn't see him anywhere. The amalgamation was still writhing as it went, though whether of its own volition or that of space, I'm not sure. When I finally got to the cockpit, I realized the magnet anchors were on, keeping the ship steady in place during all of that. It took a little searching, but I was able to disengage them, watching out of the front windshield as the ship began to float gently above the ground. Steadily, ever so steadily, I managed to maneuver it out the window. The rest was simple, an autopilot system that would aim it right at Earth. Not like there was anywhere else this thing was fit to go. I keyed everything in and sat back, letting the computer do the rest. Think I'm going to find that guy when I get back. What was his F** kin name? That's right, Mitchell Farmer. Maybe I'll get enough bullets that he can have one for everyone that was up here. Maybe I'll give him 2 for Mick's memory. Eden faded behind me, the dim lights inside shining through huge windows, giving the appearance that the space station was still thriving despite all the death on board. It wasn't a bad job while it lasted, honestly. Definitely going to be a pain in the ass getting used to being on Earth again. God, it's going to be a long flight back, but this message will probably get back to Earth before I will. If you see Mitch down there, well, give him a message from me. Don't even tell him who it's from. Just give him a nice little scare to get him ready for me. Tell him he's going to lose his skin. I'm a medical scientist who was involved in a failed experiment of which you are all experiencing the consequences. I'm sorry, but you have to know. In 2007, a group of Japanese scientists discovered a way of growing new teeth in adult mice by transplanting into them lab-grown tooth germs derived from materials extracted from other younger mice. These new teeth were fully functional and indistinguishable from the old ones, and the results were welcomed by doctors in the field of regenerative medicine. However, as with many results of experiments performed on animals, the question was, would the same method work on humans? Officially, no attempts to replicate the experiment on humans were made, given the ethical intricacies involved. Unofficially, several experiments were conducted and failed. Further testing was suspended. Several years ago, another group of Japanese scientists, with strong ties to the first, published the results of a similar experiment. This time, instead of extracting biological material from one specimen, growing it externally, and transplanting the result into a second specimen, the scientists discovered they could promote tooth growth in a single mouse by using a drug to suppress a certain protein in that mouse. This method was cheaper, quicker, and simpler, and it avoided many of the ethical issues which had prevented the earlier method from being officially tested on humans. Consequently, the lead scientist of the Japanese group, Dr. Ochimori, partnered with an American university, received funding from both the US and Japanese governments, and assembled a team to test the ability of the protein-suppressing drug to promote tooth growth in human beings. My mentor, Dr. Khan, was chosen to co-lead the testing, and Dr. Khan chose me to help him. In total, there were 6 people involved in the human trial: Dr. Ochimori, Dr. Khan, me, 2 Japanese scientists chosen by Dr. Ochimori, and the test subject, whom I knew only as Kenji. Of these 6 people, I am the only survivor, although, as you will come to understand, the term survivor is itself problematic, and in a sense there no longer exist any survivors of the trial, not even you. I do want to make clear here that there was no issue with consent. Kenji agreed to take part. He was a willing participant. My first impressions of Kenji were that he was a polite and humble middle-aged man whose dental problems had caused significant problems in his life, including the breakdown of his marriage and his inability to progress professionally. He was, therefore, a relatively sad individual. However, he exhibited high intelligence and was easy to work with because he understood biology, anatomy, and the foundations of what we were attempting. Hence, he was, in some sense, both the subject of the experiment and an unofficial part of the team conducting it, effectively testing upon himself. While I admit that this is unusual, and in most cases improper, no one voiced any concerns until such concerns were no longer relevant. The trial began with a small single dose of the protein-suppressing drug injected once per day. The effects were disappointing. While the drug did somewhat inhibit the creation of the requisite protein, this did not lead to any tooth growth. And it did not replicate the results Dr. Ochimori had achieved with mice, in which even minor protein suppression had led to minor tooth growth. Dr. Ochimori and Dr. Khan therefore decided to increase the dosage, and when that did not create the desired result, also the frequency. It was when Kenji started receiving 4 relatively high-dose drug injections per day that something finally happened. The first new teeth formed, and they began to penetrate his gums. But this came with a cost. The pain which Kenji endured both during the formation and eruption phases of the dental regeneration was much more intense than any of us had anticipated. In mice, the tooth growth had been generally painless, no different than when their old teeth had grown naturally. What Kenji experienced was magnitudes more painful than what he had experienced when his adult teeth had grown in, and we could not explain why. At this point, with Kenji screaming for hours in the observation room, Dr. Khan suggested stopping the trial. Dr. Ochimori disagreed. When we held a vote, all 3 Japanese members of the team voted to continue the trial, so that Dr. Khan and I were outnumbered 3-2. What was most interesting, however, was that Kenji himself did not want to stop the trial. Despite his pain, which to me seemed unbearable, I could not listen to his screams, let alone imagine the suffering which caused them. He maintained that he wanted to continue. Thus, we continued. Within 3 days of the implementation of the more intensive drug injection schedule, all of Kenji's missing teeth had grown in. This was, from a purely medical standpoint, utterly remarkable, but it rendered the trial a success only if you discounted Kenji's pain. It was not feasible, Dr. Khan argued, to report such results because one could not market a drug that caused unexplainable suffering. Dr. Ochimori disagreed, arguing that the cause of the suffering, which he deemed a side effect, need not be understood for the results to be worthwhile. He pointed out that many drugs have side effects we know about without understanding the exact biochemical mechanisms behind them. As long as the existence of the pain is not hidden, he argued, the results are beneficial, and anyone who agrees to further testing, or potentially to the resulting treatment itself, does so fully informed and of his own free will. Dr. Khan cited ethics concerns. Dr. Ochimori accused him of medical paternalism. It was in the hours during which these oft-heated discussions took place that we missed a troubling development. While it was true that in 3 days Kenji's missing teeth had all been regenerated and were functionally indistinguishable from his old teeth, this indistinguishability was temporary. For, while regular adult teeth grow to a certain size and stop, the regenerated teeth had not stopped growing. They were the same size as Kenji's old teeth only for a brief period. Then they outgrew them, first by a small amount, but steadily by more and more, until they were twice, then 3 times, 4 times, 5, their size. They were more like tusks than teeth, fang-shaped columns of dental matter erupting endlessly from his profusely bleeding gums, until even closing his mouth had become, for Kenji, impossible, and the strain this placed on his jaws bordered on the extreme. We had already cut the drug injections, of course. Or so we thought, because we soon discovered that even when we thought we knew how much of the drug Kenji was receiving, Kenji was injecting himself secretly with significantly more. This, more than anything else, drove Dr. Ochimori to despair, because he knew it invalidated the results of the trial. At this point, Dr. Khan decided to forcibly confine Kenji and perform emergency surgery on him to remove the inhumanly growing teeth. I agreed, but the 2 Japanese scientists did not, and they instead confined Dr. Khan and myself to one of the unused observation rooms. We pleaded with them to let us out. More importantly, to help Kenji. But they ignored us. For hours, we sat together silently, listened to the crying, howling, growls and crunching that emanated from somewhere in the facility, each of us imagining on his own what must have been going on. Once, through the reinforced glass window of the observation room door, I saw Kenji, if one can still refer to him as that, run past, and the impression left upon me was one of a deformed elephant, a Satan with teeth that had curved and grown into, through, his head, his brain, his self, his humanity, and exploded outwards from the interior of his skull. Come on, M-A-C-K and Zai, move your ass. You are holding your brother's back. You can know how to run. I-F-O-C-K-I-N-G, no you do. So movie. I just stared at him, my pace slowing down as everyone else got further and further away. Why was I doing this? This wasn't a real fucking boot camp. Why was I even fucking bothering with this? T-H-E-Y-R-E fucking. Leaving you behind. M-A-C-K-N-Z-I. You began a B lift in the F asterisk seeking dust. Move. I stopped. Lieutenant Chad stopped too, and for a moment we just sort of stared each other down. Or, staring each other down wouldn't be the right way to describe it. That would imply some sort of hostility. I didn't get any sense of real hostility from him. If anything, he just didn't really seem to give a shit. When I turned to leave, he didn't try to stop me, didn't make any effort to yell after me. He just turned and went to go and catch up with the others while I jogged back to the cabin. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. When I finally got back to the cabin, I found Keelan laying on his bed. He seemed to just be staring into space and barely even seemed to notice me when I came in. If you're gonna ask me to come back then, asterisk cough. I'm done with this shit, he said bitterly. Actually, I'm here to join you, I said before sitting on his bed. He scoffed but didn't respond. Sergeant Hunter came in after you left, I said. He gave this whole speech. Said they'd talk to the police about Cody, but bullshit. There haven't been any fucking police. Keelan snapped. He's out behind the fucking office. I've seen him. He sat up, fidgeting with his phone. They probably won't call the fucking police. I mean, look at this shit show. How much of this shit do you think is on the books? I'll bet they slapped this shit together under the table as cheaply as possible. You think these guys are equipped to handle a fucking body turning up during their little program? And fuck. Cody he was. That wasn't natural. That wasn't an accident, or an animal attack, or whatever their gun of asterisk king claim it was. It was. He trailed off, unable to finish that sentence. I know, I said quietly. Keelan was staring down at his phone. I could see him willing himself to make that call. But he couldn't, and I knew why he couldn't. Did you ever look to see if it was in the news? He asked quietly. It took me a moment to realize what he was asking about. No, I said softly. I didn't really want to know. She's still alive. They both are. I looked up at him. Critical condition last I checked, but alive. I think one's in a coma. That's what the report said. They posted their names. I looked them up. Fuck. I tried to open my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. I looked them up, lurked them online, found some photos. That one girl, the one we hit she. He choked on the words for a moment before he continued. I saw her, in a hospital bed. She was covered by a blanket, but you could see where the stumps were, where her legs weren't, and God, I don't. We did that to her. We've asterisk king did that to her, and his hands were shaking. His breathing was getting heavier, almost to the point of hyperventilating. We did that to her, Avery, and we just drove away like nothing happened. I didn't think it was that bad. I didn't think. He trailed off, breaking down into sobs, but I still knew he was lying. I reached into my pocket for my own phone and stared down at it thoughtfully. Maybe he was too scared to do what needed to be done. But right now, I wasn't. Consequences be damned. Before I could do anything, though, I heard the cabin door fly open. I looked up to see Adam storming in, his usually placid expression twisted in anger, his eyes fixated on me, and I saw rage burning inside of them. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he demanded. "You can't just leave the group whenever you feel like it. We're a unit, Avery. We don't go off on our own. A unit." I repeated. "We're not in the fucking military, Adam. We're not going to *King War. This is just some fucking fantasy boot camp. It's bullshit. It's training," Adam snarled. "I don't CAR. Does no one else fucking give a shit about what happened to Cody? Is no one else fucking paying attention? He's dead, Adam. Cody's fucking dead, and we're just gonna go on a jog. They didn't even call the fucking police," Keelan rambled. "They're just leaving him there, out behind the office. They're not calling anyone. They're not doing anything about it. What the fuck do you want them to do?" Adam demanded. "KLODEPOLIC. For fuck's sake, Adam. That's the bare fucking minimum here." Sergeant Hunter stood up there in front of all of us and lied. I snapped. "Look around, Adam. Do you see any cops? Did you see any last night? Has anyone talked to us? No. They're not calling the cops. For some stupid fucking reason, they're not calling the cops." Adam finally noticed the cell phone in my hand. I noticed everyone else hanging on to his every word, listening intently to him as if he was revealing the secrets of the universe. But I don't really see why. Everything about him feels so fake. From the low, commanding voice he speaks in, to the way he skulks around, staring at everyone as if he's evaluating them. I can't shake the feeling that it's all an act, and not a good one either. Among the three instructors, Hunter is the oldest, the shortest, and the least physically imposing. Lieutenant David is at least a head taller than him, and Lieutenant Chad looms so far over him that Hunter could probably get lost in his shadow. Why do we need to call them by those stupid titles anyway? I looked into Sergeant Hunter the other night, and as far as I can tell, he's never even served in the military. Neither has Lieutenant David. Apparently Lieutenant Chad has, but I wasn't able to find out anything about his service, and I don't think I'd get an answer if I asked him. Honestly, I'm okay just leaving it alone. Apparently this weekend, our cabin is going to be doing our survival training. Tomorrow we'll be going out into the woods, and we'll be staying there for the next 48 hours. No supplies. All we can do is forage and hunt. I can't really say I'm looking forward to it, but on the bright side, I'll finally be able to turn in early without having to race Keelan back to the cabin. Seriously, it's every *King night with that guy. He goes for about an hour each time. I'm starting to think he's got a problem, and I don't know how he hasn't chafed his dick off. I'm pretty sure he thinks no one knows, but I'm willing to bet Leo's caught on too. Other than that, sleeping outside again probably won't be too bad. It can't be any worse than the beds we've got. Cody was asking about wild animals earlier. He said he saw something in the woods. Adam said there's nothing but deer out here, and I didn't bother mentioning that deer can still be pretty dangerous. Realistically, I don't think we have anything to worry about. What the was I thinking? July 13th, 2024. There's something out there, and it's not a *King deer. We went out into the woods with Lieutenant Chad this morning, and for the most part, everything was going pretty good. He showed us how to forage and set traps. He showed us how to build a shelter and a fire. He helped us get our bearings before he left. He did give us a flare gun in case of an emergency, but I didn't think we'd have to use it. I didn't think. CKF*CKF*CK. After Lieutenant Chad left, we divided up roles among our group. Leo and Keelan were to watch the camp, keep the fire going, and build up our shelter. Matthew, Cody, Adam, and I were supposed to gather food. Lieutenant Chad had left us with 2 bows and a handful of arrows that we divided amongst ourselves. We split up into 2 teams, each team with a bowman. I went with Adam while Matthew and Cody stuck together. We went off in opposite directions to see what was around. Adam carried the bow and we spent our time surveying the area, looking for any signs of life. Adam mentioned looking for deer trails, but I got the impression that his fantasy of taking down a deer was a little unrealistic. So I made a point to set up a few small traps using bits of Nutriloaf Lieutenant Chad had given us. I was hoping that if we were lucky, we might just land a squirrel or a rabbit. Although I did get a little excited when Adam mentioned he found a deer trail. Right here. Looks pretty fresh too, he'd said before leading me down it. I'd almost started to buy into the fantasy that we would manage to find an actual deer, until I noticed the smell. A sweet, pungent aroma of decay hanging heavy in the air. I noticed Adam's brow furrowing as he noticed the scent, but he pressed on, curious as to its source. Come on, man. It's just a dead animal. Just leave it, I said, but he shook his head. A dead animal wouldn't smell that bad, he said plainly. It was a few moments later that I noticed something ahead of us, a shape hanging off one of the trees, swarmed by buzzing flies, and it took me a couple of seconds to realize it was covered in fur. At first I thought it was just a deer pelt. Maybe we'd stumbled upon some hunter's abandoned kill, but there was too much there to be just a deer pelt. We were looking at what was left of an entire deer. I froze, staring at the blob of flesh and fur hanging from the branch. It didn't look like a deer, not in any way that mattered. The shape was wrong, like someone had reached in, pulled out the bones, and tossed the rest aside. The flesh was ripped in strange places, but the rest of it was more or less intact. What did this? Holy shit, Adam said under his breath. I looked over at him, and that's when I saw the rest. At least 5 or 6 corpses strewn across the forest, all of them torn apart and warped into strange, boneless blobs of flesh. My stomach churned, and I retched before vomiting up the Nutriloaf I'd had for breakfast. Let's go, Adam said sternly. Now, I didn't need to be told twice and hastily followed him back down the deer trail. What was that? I asked. What did that? I don't know, he replied, and for a moment I thought I heard a slight tremble in his voice. He looked back before smoothing down his pale blonde hair, but those bodies were only about a day old, so whatever did that could be anywhere. I almost asked him if we should consider shooting off the flare gun, but I didn't want to sound like I was ready to give up yet. So I just followed him, letting him lead me back to camp. It wasn't long before I saw out campfire through the trees and spotted Leo and Keelan lounging beside it. Adam barely even made it back to camp before he was interrogating them. Matthew and Cody, have you heard from them? What? No, they're off on a hunt. I saw them heading west. Why, what's wrong? Leo asked. Missing the gang already? Keelan teased, although he was ignored. Avery, let's go get them. Leo, keep the flare gun on your person. There's something out here. I saw a flicker of confusion cross Leo's face before Adam pushed past him. Like an animal, I heard him ask, but Adam was already gone. Leo and I traded a look before I followed, and it didn't take long before we heard a voice in the distance. Matthew's voice. Q-O-D-Y. Cody, we-E-R-E-R-E-U. Adam's pace increased as he tore through the woods, following the sound of Matthew's voice, and after a couple of minutes, we saw him wandering through the trees up ahead, bow in hand and arrows on his back. Cody, Matthew. He paused at the sound of Adam's voice and looked over at us as we emerged from the brush. Oh, am I off course? Have you seen Cody? No, we came to get you both back to camp. Where did you last see Cody? About a few meters from here, give or take, Matthew said. I saw a rabbit and took a shot at it. Thought I'd hit it, but it took off on me. I thought I might be close enough to catch it, but he shook his head. Stupid idea. Lost track of Cody around then. I didn't think he'd be far, but we'll find him, Adam said gravely. But watch the yelling. We don't know what else might hear us out here. What else? Matthew asked, his brow furrowing. For a moment, I saw a flicker of concern in his eyes before Adam continued the search. We spent roughly the next hour looking for Cody, but in the end went back without him. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. He probably asterisk kicked off back to the cabin. Keelan scoffed. I mean, you've been watching him, right? Everything we do. He's been in dead last. Every night, he's the only one who doesn't get to eat. Maybe he's not asterisk king cut out for this. He wouldn't leave without telling us, Matthew said. That's not like him. He was there with me 1 minute, and he was gone the next. Yeah, well, people do weird things under pressure, Keelan shrugged. No, I'm with Matthew. Cody isn't that kind of man, Adam said. Then what happened to him? Leo asked. Because if he didn't leave, then something had to have happened. He can't have just gotten lost. These woods aren't that thick. Maybe he fell or something, I suggested. The terrain here is flat and fairly even, Adam said, shaking his head. We would have seen him. I'm telling you, he've asterisk kicked off. Keelan said before getting up and stretching. I'm gonna go take a leak. You guys figure this shit out. We watched him go before Leo spoke again. My question is, if we're thinking something happened to him, then maybe we ought to consider using the flare. If he's lying in a ditch with a broken ankle or something, we need to call for help. I say we do one last sweep before we use the flare, just to be sure, Adam said. Or maybe we send someone back to the training compound. Have someone check to see if he did go back without telling us. Can it be Keelan? Leo asked. I don't care who it is, but we're running out of daylight and... The screams from the woods cut Adam off, and all of our heads shifted toward the direction Keelan had gone off in. Immediately, we were on our feet, racing to see what was the matter. I saw Keelan running toward us, eyes wide with panic. Adam tried to talk to him, but he shot right past him, sprinting back toward camp. What's his problem? Leo started to ask before looking back in the direction Keelan had just come from and freezing. He and Adam saw it first, and a moment later I noticed Matthew tensing up as well. I looked around, but I didn't see anything. Not until I looked up. The shape above us hung from the branches of one of the trees, although I didn't immediately recognize it as a person. I didn't immediately recognize it as Cody. He'd been peeled. I don't know how else to describe it. Strips of skin had been flayed off of his body and were hooked to the branches of the trees above us, suspending him like a grotesque marionette. I'm not sure if whatever killed him did that to him because it derived some sort of sick pleasure from ripping him apart that way, or because it was the only way they could hang him from the tree. After all, they'd taken his arms and legs. Leo fired the flare up into the air, but none of us said a word. We all just stood there in silence and stared while we waited for the lieutenants to find us. We're back at the cabin now. I don't know what's going to happen next. Adam says we should try to get some sleep, but I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see Cody hanging in those branches, and I think about what happened the other night. The lieutenants didn't come to get us at the usual time this morning. We still woke up at 4. We still filed into the mess hall for breakfast. The Nutriloaf was still there, but the lieutenants and Sergeant Hunter weren't. I heard some of the other guys saying that they were having a meeting. I don't know what they needed to have of Asterisk King meeting about. Something in the woods killed Cody. What exactly was there to discuss? They should have called the police the moment they found him, but there haven't been any police. None that I've seen. Last night I watched Lieutenant Chad and David carry the body, wrapped in a tarp out to the back of the main office. Up until this afternoon, it was just sitting there and rotting. I don't know where it is now. Why the hell didn't they call the police? Do they have something to hide? I didn't think they had anything to do with Cody's death, but now I'm starting to wonder. I've thought about calling the police myself, but Every time I reach for my phone, I freeze. What exactly happens if I do call the police? We were the only ones out there with Cody. What if they think we did it? No, no, that's not what I'm worried about. I should be honest here, shouldn't I? I keep thinking about Cody's body. I keep thinking about the ragged stumps where his limbs used to be, and I keep thinking about that girl. I tried to talk to the guys about it after breakfast, while we all just sat uneasily in the mess hall, but that was just a waste of time. It took off his arms and legs. I'd said, "You guys don't think it's weird that it took off his arms and legs?" Keelan got quiet, but it was harder reading the looks on the others' faces. Something mauled him, Adam said calmly. Simple as that. And put him up in a fucking tree. I asked. You saw what I saw, didn't you? Something grabbed him while Matthew wasn't looking, peeled him like a fucking orange, pulled off his arms, pulled off his legs, and strung him up in a tree where we would find him. That doesn't fucking scare you. Adam didn't respond. Avery's got a point. Keelan said quietly, even if it was an animal. The way it took his arms and legs, doesn't that remind you of? Enough. Adam said, his voice firm and decisive. We need to stay focused. Focused on what? Keelan asked. What are we supposed to go outside and run around until Chad tells us what to do? Cody's dead. Why the hell are we taking this in stride? Because that's what men do. Adam snapped. Now are you gonna be a *king man, Keelan, or are you just going to go through life whining and simpering like a little bitch? Keelan just stared at him. What the is wrong with you, man? He asked. What the is actually wrong with you? His eyes shifted to all of us and lingered especially long on me. What's it going to be, Keelan? Adam asked coldly. Keelan shook his head. As Sergeant Hunter's inaugural speech ended, I noticed Lieutenant Chad and David bringing out trolleys with food on them, plates with something that looked like muffins made out of Thanksgiving turkey stuffing. I guess Sergeant Hunter was expecting the entire room to be wondering, what the hell is that? Because he answered the question before anyone even asked. Gentlemen, say hello to your new favorite meal. It ain't pretty, it won't taste good, but it'll give you the energy you'll need for the days ahead. This is the only food you're guaranteed here. You'll get it for breakfast and you'll get it for lunch. Dinner? Well, dinner is something you earn. If you soldier on and you fight through your trials, then you'll eat like a man. But if you don't, then you don't *king eat. That's life, gentlemen. There are no *king handouts, and the sooner you learn that, the better. And you'd best be *king thankful for what you do get. Sit, and I want to hear you give thanks. On cue, everyone else sat. The plates were handed out, but nobody ate. Not until Sergeant Hunter spoke again. Lord, may this food restore our strength. May it fuel our bodies and our minds so that we can strengthen our souls so they may better serve you, O Lord. In defense of your faith, in protection of our holy tradition, and in our defeat of the wicked. Deus Vult. Deus Vult, came the murmured reply before we were finally allowed to eat. The food was strange. The texture was similar to meatloaf, although it felt more like bread than meat. It was crumbly, dry, and mostly flavorless. Nutriloaf, I heard Leo say, used to be popular in prisons. Never thought I'd ever actually try it. Didn't they ban this stuff from prisons? Keelan asked. I heard eating it was considered cruel and unusual punishment. I mean, it's not bad, Cody said. He'd already mostly finished his and had a few crumbs stuck in his beard. Given what we're here for, it's not a bad pick, Leo said. You ever hear of John Harvey Kellogg? Like the cereal? Keelan asked. Exactly. He believed in the importance of a bland diet to help minimize sinful urges. His teachings were actually fascinating, if you actually take the time to read them. Have you ever considered that you're just a really boring person? Keelan asked. The entire thesis of the program is that adversity breeds excellence. Adam said. In dire situations, one doesn't usually have a lot of luxuries. He took a bite of his loaf, chewing it thoughtfully before swallowing. If this is the worst meal you'll ever have, then anything else will taste like prime rib. After our breakfast of Nutriloaf and warm water, we were led back to our cabin where Lieutenant Chad went through a more private orientation. Gentlemen, during the next month you will live and die by routine. Day in and day out, you will follow the schedule I set for you. At 4 a.m., you're out of bed, and by 4:30 you will be in the mess hall for breakfast. By 5, we will return here for roll call. Understood? Yes, sir. The words fell out of my mouth without much thought behind them. That's what I like to hear. Now, as part of your training under me, you will follow my command to the letter. Outside of your downtime in the evenings, you do not eat unless I tell you to eat. You do not drink unless I tell you. You can drink. You do not take a shit unless you have my formal permission to go and take a shit. Am I clear? Yes, sir. Good. You will dress in uniform during your time here. You will have 3 sets which you are responsible for. You do not get another one. I don't care if you don't have a single other scrap of clothing to wear. I'll make you spend the rest of the month buck of asterisk king naked if I have to. You are not entitled to jack f asterisk king shit while you are here, clear? Yes, sir. That's right. Now when I call your names, you step forward, you take your uniforms, and you go get change. Bring your clothes and your personals back out here when you're done. Lieutenant Chad looked down at his clipboard before calling the first name. Matthew Brisbois. Matthew dutifully went up to take his uniforms. Lieutenant Chad gave him an approving nod before he disappeared into the cabin. Keelan Galloway. The look he gave Keelan wasn't quite as approving. I wondered if he could just sense how much of an asshole he was. Keelan admittedly does have one of those faces. Cody Gillard. As Cody took his uniforms, Lieutenant Chad huffed at him. I'm gonna be on your ass, big boy, he said before calling my name. Avery Mackenzie. I quietly took my uniforms. Lieutenant Chad didn't even look at me as he handed them to me, and I dutifully went to the cabin to change as he called the last 2 names. Leo Stone. Adam Yakshemik. The uniforms weren't really anything special. Gym shorts and plain shirts. We all got changed in relative silence, and when we were done, we brought our belongings out to Lieutenant Chad and stored them away in a set of plastic bins. Cell phones go in the bins too. Ladies, right now you're undergoing a transformative process. You cannot afford a distraction like your asterisk king cell phone. Don't worry, I'll be keeping them safe for you. And if you absolutely need your phone for any reason, you come and talk to me, all right? I watched as Adam, Leo, Cody, and Matthew calmly put their phones in the bin. Keelan, on the other hand, didn't. I don't think Lieutenant Chad noticed, but I saw him slip it into his pocket. Normally, I wouldn't have been inclined to mimic Keelan, but it seemed like a good idea. So while Lieutenant Chad was speaking, I slipped my phone into my pocket as well. The bins were closed up. Lieutenant Chad had us write our names on them and carry them down to the office while he briefed us on what was coming next. Now the project begins with the gauntlet. This is the first step on your journey. This first step is meant to break you. Is that clear? After some quiet replies of, "Yes, Lieutenant," he continued, "Our days are gonna start with a jog. So once you've got your shit stored away, make sure your shoes are F king laced up and be ready to run. 'Cause now that we're done with the F king orientation, I'm gonna send you pantsy straight to hell. ****. When Lieutenant Chad had said, "A jog," I didn't expect it to be 10 miles. Although all things considered, I had been expecting a lot worse when he promised to send us to hell. The jog was rough, but it was nothing I couldn't handle. In fact, most of our group did pretty well during the jog. Most of us. I noticed Cody lagging behind after the first half hour. His shirt was already drenched in sweat, and his breathing came in slow, heavy pants. Cody admittedly was a fairly big guy already, and although he was strong, he really didn't have the stamina for this sort of thing. And Instructor Chad tore him a brand new asshole for that. Once he'd noticed Cody had fallen behind, he was on top of him, walking beside him as he struggled to catch up and screaming at him. "Come on, move your kicking ass, fat boy. UUANTME2 Dangelo AF saying, Turk on a stick. UF CKing TUB of lard. What the F CK is DORONG with you. It's BEN half AAF kicking ador. It's just a joke." I tried to tune it out. This was what I'd expected. This was what they'd shown off in their videos. This was part of the experience. I didn't say anything. I didn't want Lieutenant Chad yelling at me. I just tried to keep my head down and keep running. After the jog was a 10-minute water break. Water wasn't allowed during the jog, followed by an obstacle course, not too different from what you might see in the training montage from an army movie. Lunch was around 1 in the afternoon and consisted of another helping of Nutriloaf, and as soon as we were done, it was right back to training. I guess it wasn't all miserable. They pitted us against the guys in the other 2 cabins in a few games, tug of war and rugby, to name a couple. Those were almost fun, and when dinner rolled around at 7, I was happy to see they weren't bringing us another serving of Nutriloaf. For dinner, we got Salisbury steak. It wasn't great and tasted like a TV dinner, but compared to the Nutriloaf, it might as well have been fine dining. As we wolfed it down, though, I noticed Cody sitting in front of an empty space. There'd been no meal brought out for him. I saw him glancing over at Lieutenant Chad, who glared right back at him. "You pick up the F king slack, lard ass, and maybe you'll get to eat tomorrow." Cody didn't reply. He just watched as Lieutenant Chad walked off. "Here," I said, moving to cut my steak in half. "You can." "Don't," Adam said coolly. I looked up at him. He didn't earn it today. It's just the first day. I started, but Adam cut me off. He didn't earn it. He looked over at Cody, who seemed to shrink back from him a little. "Those are the rules, gentlemen. You earn your dinner or you don't eat. That's life." Adam's eyes shifted to me next. "We should not be obligated to share what we rightfully earned. Now eat your dinner, Avery." I took one last look at Cody before quietly finishing up my steak. We should have had leisure time after dinner. But as soon as the plates were cleared away, I noticed Sergeant Hunter taking his place at the front of the mess hall. "All right, gentlemen. Can I have your attention for a moment?" The room fell silent. That was a solid first day today. Most of you should be proud. Most of you. And normally, this is the part of the day where I'd send you to your well-earned rest. But because this is our first day, there is one more activity I have for us. Just one. So, bear with me for just a little bit longer. Let's go outside. He beckoned us to follow him, and in unison we got up and marched outside. We let him lead us to a dirt field a few meters behind the mess hall. This place looked barren compared to everywhere else we'd seen so far. There was no grass underfoot, just dry, somewhat loose dirt, and shovels. You know, we never really think about how good we have it until it's gone. We never see the value in our lives until they're over. And make no mistake, death is the one thing certain in this world. It's the great equalizer. The one thing that unifies us all. Every single person at this training compound is going to die. And today, you're all going to face that inevitable death. Grab a king shovel. And that's what we did. We each grabbed a shovel before spreading out to find a spot. Tonight, you will not sleep in a bed. No, tonight, you will sleep in the ground. Tonight, you are going to dig your own grave. Tonight, you are going to reflect on your death. You are going to reflect on who you are, who you want to become. And tomorrow morning, when you climb out of that grave, You will leave your old self behind in it, and you will build yourself anew. As Sergeant Hunter gave his sermon, I watched as my friends dug their graves close together. Adam in the middle, the others spread out around. They didn't seem to notice when I picked a spot a little closer to the woods and started to dig there. It was hard work, but the soil was relatively loose, and I didn't need to dig that deep. I just needed a hole deep enough for me to comfortably lie in. The stars shone above me as I lay in my grave, listening to Sergeant Hunter's monologue about learning from death. But I tuned him out. After a while, he and the lieutenants left us to sleep. And I was honestly happy that I didn't need to hear his voice anymore. I don't really know if it'd be fair to say that I reflected on my life. I don't really remember what I was thinking about. I just remember the exhaustion. I remember trying to sleep. And then I remember waking up, stiff, sore, and covered in dirt. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The next day followed a similar routine. At 4 a.m., the lieutenants came to wake us from our graves. After a rushed, cold shower, we were treated to a breakfast of Nutriloaf and another bizarre little prayer from Sergeant Hunter. Then came another jog, another run around the obstacle course, a game of tug-of-war, a few rounds of rugby. The ice baths were new, but what's there really to say about them aside from how *king miserable they were? Cody didn't get dinner again. This time I didn't offer him any of mine. There was no grave digging the next night, just a bonfire with some of the guys from the other 2 cabins. But I really couldn't have given less of a damn about any of them. I did notice Keelan sneaking off to the cabin, and thought he was going to turn in early. But judging by the moaning and crappy music I heard when I decided to call it a night myself, he was up to something else. I hadn't questioned why he'd kept his phone before, and to be honest, I would have died a happy man if I'd never found out the answer. I decided to socialize for another half hour instead of interrupting him. It was less awkward. Today was more of the same. 4 a.m. start. Nutriloaf. A jog where Cody got screamed at the entire time. Obstacle course, swimming, ice baths, tug-of-war, rugby. They added in fight training today, which was a bit of a slog. They paired me up with a guy from one of the other cabins. A guy just a little bit bigger than me who went by Josh. He tossed me around the ring for a few minutes before pinning me. Lieutenant Chad yelled at me for that, but I still got dinner. Cody, on the other hand, didn't for the 3rd night in a row. He tried to ask if he could share some of my pasta, but Adam shut him down before he could say much. I wouldn't have minded sharing. The pasta wasn't much better than the Nutriloaf. There was another bonfire tonight, but I don't really want to get involved. Keelan turned in for the night early again, so I figured I'd find a quiet place to sit and write for a bit while I wait him out. He's probably done by now. I think I'll walk by the cabin and check. July 12th, 2024. Is this supposed to feel routine? It's not painless. My body is so *king sore from the jogs and games, but it's starting to feel routine. Maybe that's the point. I can't believe I've almost been here for an entire week now. Every day just sort of bleeds into the next. I didn't even bother writing anything last night because there wasn't really anything to write. They made us pull a truck with some rope. That's the highlight of my day, summed up in a single sentence. Today was more interesting, at least. Today they started weapons training. We spent most of the afternoon learning how to shoot. Sergeant Hunter made this whole speech about how a man is by nature a warrior. He will not look for battle, but he will be ready for it when it comes. In the blink of an eye, it had absorbed the room and me, and the facility, and you and the solar system, and the universe. We have all become of the cell. We used to ask, what is the universe? We must now ask, of what is the cell which contains the universe? In a way, nothing has changed. Your life goes on as usual. You probably didn't even feel it. Or if you did, your mind imagined some prosaic explanation. Perhaps it doesn't even matter. Living versus living within a cell. But I believe that a part of us knows we are irretrievably separated from the past. Those who died before and those who die after share different fates. Looking at the fragments of Kenji's emptied shell, I felt awe and sadness and nostalgia. We used to look at the stars and feel terror, wondering if there was any meaning to our existence. How comforting such non-meaningful existence now seems. Once, I was afraid that I did not have a purpose in life. I tried to find it in my relationships, myself, my work. Now, I feel revulsion at the thought that I am trapped in a biological machine whose workings I do not understand and whose purpose we cannot escape. Our local gym is haunted by a fat ghost. I settled myself on the huge neon bouncy gym ball, tightened my core muscles, and moved my legs. I was still panting, dripping with sweat from my session on the elliptical. I turned to the mirror to check my form, and out of nowhere, a large girl dressed in pink and top gym gear barged into the ball, like a bear. I can't quite describe how she just appeared and bodied me. "Hey," I cried, angry and confused, struggling to regain my balance on the ball while pushing her away. I couldn't feel anything. I looked around for the girl who had barreled into me. No one was close. Everybody was focused on their machine and their movements, and their music playing right into their ears. I looked back in the mirror. A large girl wearing a tight pink top with the word "beautiful" printed in darker pink, chubby, curvy letters right across her boob shelf stared back at me. I stared. And then, my anger and confusion slowly gave way to trickling fear as I noticed that her eyes were too black, her mouth too black, gaping holes of misery and rage. We both spoke at the same time. "You can see me. Why did you push me?" Even as she spoke, the vision flitted and faded in the mirror. I could feel my heart rate slowing down to normal. I looked again. There was no one in the mirror, but now that I knew she was there, I could sense her standing next to me, her sweaty, bulging, uncomfortable presence radiating discomfort. Then she moved away. I turned, following her presence with my eyes, and I spotted a young fellow on the press bench, lifting more than what seemed like a safe weight. I knew she was heading over to him. "No, stop," I cried out, reaching out in a futile motion. Too late. The weights smashed down as a howl of agony rose, penetrating through all earbuds and headphones, and ceasing all movement in the gym. They told us to leave before the paramedics arrived. All night I dreamed of the large ghost in the gym, causing havoc and injury. Had she died there? How? Against my better judgment, I went back the next day. I did the same routine, the elliptical getting me sweating and flushed, and went over to the mirror in front of the huge bouncy gym balls. One of them seemed deflated, sagging sideways, and I felt the rush of fear in me again. She was there. In the mirror, I could see her sitting on the deflated ball, squishing it under her. She was wearing the same tight pink top. "Beautiful." "Please stop," I said, realizing I sounded ridiculous. She shrugged, turning to look at my image in the mirror with those black pools of eyes. The first thing I realized after I died was that I'm still fat. My breath slowed back to normal. Her mirror image was fading. Not knowing what else to do, I sat on a bright orange gym ball next to her. "Have you tried this?" I tightened my abs and stretched. "It feels so good." The ball next to me, she was seated on changed shape, and I knew she was copying me. "If you let people be, I'll train with you every day. It's much more fun with a gym buddy," I said. "Promise." I felt her grip my mind, but the fear was ebbing. I promised. Project Alpha 2. Nobody's talking about it. Nobody even seems to be thinking about it. We just woke up this morning, got back in the car, and started driving again like nothing happened, and everything just seems normal. We didn't make as many stops today, but I think that has less to do with the mood and more to do with the fact that the project starts tomorrow. There's not as much time to stop and bum around whatever small town we're passing through. Today we're on a deadline. We stopped for breakfast later than normal. We drove about an hour down the highway before finding some small diner to pop into, but aside from that, there wasn't any indication anything was different among us. Maybe there's just nothing to talk about, but that doesn't feel right. I didn't sleep last night. but nobody else looks tired. Keelan won't shut up as usual. If anything, he's even louder than normal this morning. I'm not sure if he's on edge or if I'm just less willing to put up with him than usual. He spent most of our breakfast stop teasing Cody for stuffing his face. Cody just wiped the biscuits and gravy from his beard before he insisted that since he's probably never going to come this way again, he might as well see what the restaurants we visit have to offer. While they had their stupid little back and forth, Leo and Adam hovered over Leo's phone and talked about the route we were going to take, what stops we'd make, and how long we could stay. Leo kept bringing up some military history museum we'd be passing, as if he was quietly begging Adam to let us stop by it. Adam didn't really give him much of a reaction, but I took that as a good thing. If I have to watch Leo gush over another scale-size replica of some battle nobody cares about, I might actually turn myself into a casualty. Matthew didn't really talk. He just kept to himself and nursed the single glass of ice water he'd ordered. But that was normal for him. Matthew isn't usually the sort who has a lot to say, and he's still on this weird health kick, where he's only supposed to eat things he's made himself, so there wasn't much to read into with him. Everyone was just normal, like nothing even happened. We should make it to the training compound today. I feel like I should be more excited for this. Everyone else is, but I don't really feel anything. I'm trying to fake it, and I think most of them are buying it. Cody, Matthew, and Leo definitely are. I think Keelan is too. But Adam has always been hard to read. You just look into his eyes, and there's simultaneously nothing and everything in there. It's like staring at a brick wall. He's always been like that, ever since we were kids. I'm probably overthinking it. Adam has been busy driving. He probably hasn't even thought about me. I'm not even sure he's even taken a moment to even think about what happened last night. Is it weird that nobody's talking about it? After what happened, we should be. No, I'm not going to bring it up. Nobody's talking about it. I'm not sure if they just don't care, or if it really just isn't worth discussing with them. Maybe I'm being weird by dwelling on it. I mean, what happened. Nobody else seems worried. Maybe I'm just being too sensitive. I don't know. I feel sick. Maybe it's because I'm trying to write in the car, but I need to do something to stop my mind from racing. Keelan keeps talking, and his voice is starting to give me a headache. I don't know how everyone else puts up with him, although I am looking forward to watching the drill instructor tear him a new one once we get to the training compound. He's gonna be in for one hell of a rude awakening. I think that's the only thing I'm looking forward to this month. From the way Adam described this whole thing, it's going to be miserable. I think the entire point is that it's going to be miserable because adversity breeds excellence. At least that's what he keeps saying. When you're pushed to your absolute limit, it brings out your true self. He explained to me, you finally see who you really are, broken down to your rawest form, and from there, you can be built back up. Reforge yourself into a stronger, better man with a deeper connection to his true self, a deeper connection to those who have been through the same trials he has, and a deeper connection to God. The ultimate bonding experience. If it were up to me, I wouldn't be going, but Adam kept insisting. He kept saying that it was important for us all to be there. And once he got the other guys on board, it was harder and harder to say no. Leo especially got into it. He kept telling me, God was calling us here, whatever that's supposed to mean. I kept telling them all that I wasn't interested, but Adam was adamant. He said he'd already reserved a spot for me, and he'd cover the cost of admission, that he wanted to do this together, and eventually. I caved. I really am a sucker, aren't I? I don't actually know why I caved in the end. Maybe because I figured it was easier than fighting it. Ironically, it was easier to just suck it up and go along with it. I tried to find some sort of list of activities online, just to see if I could figure out what I was getting into, but they don't post that stuff on the website. I guess they don't want to scare their prospective customers off. I was able to find a few videos online they posted, And this stuff looks intense. 10-mile jogs, ice baths, survivalism training. It's all supposed to grow you into a better man. But there's gotta be a way to grow as a person without this stuff, right? I didn't mention to Adam that I'd looked up the program, and I didn't tell him about how many people online had said the whole thing was probably just a grift. I didn't think he'd care, and I got the feeling he'd see all the stuff I was concerned about as a benefit. Adversity breeds excellence, after all. I guess it's just 1 month. So there's a silver lining. I'm pretty sure I can survive a month of this, and when it's done, I can go back home and put all of this behind me like a bad dream. Maybe I'll get lucky and it won't actually be so bad. God, I hope so. July 10th, 2024. This is exactly as bad as they promised it would be. They said Project Alpha was going to be brutal, and they didn't lie. I wanted to write in my journal every night, but I legitimately haven't even had the energy. Lieutenant Chad sorta looked exactly the way you'd expect someone named Chad Tyson to look, which is to say, the poster child for steroid abuse. He seemed nice enough at the time though, so I didn't think too much on it. He signed us in, showed us to our cabin, and told us to get a good sleep since we'd be starting bright and early the next morning. The cabin was kinda cramped. There wasn't really anything else inside them but the beds, which were small and hard with cheap paper thin sheets and cheap pillows that might as well have not even been there. Some of the other guys wanted to socialize a bit, and I remember Keelan talking about a bonfire, but I didn't go. I told the guys I wanted to turn in early since Instructor Tyson had warned us about the early start, but Adam was the only one who agreed with me. I didn't talk to him about what had happened, actually. Adam and I only barely spoke before we turned in for the night. I didn't really know if I was going to get much sleep considering how bad the bed was and how much my mind was racing, but I was already tired from not really having slept the night before, so I guess the exhaustion did me a few favors there. I didn't really know what I'd be waking up to, so I am glad I got some sleep. Turned out I was gonna need it. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. At 4 a.m., the lieutenant started pounding on our doors and sounding bullhorns to get us out of bed. Once we were out of the cabin and lined up along with the residents of the other 2 cabins, they marched us into the mess hall for orientation. There was a man waiting for us in the mess hall. His hair was cropped short, being just a little longer than a buzz cut, although didn't really distract from the fact that he was balding. He had a heavy scruff that I wouldn't have called a full beard, and very intense eyes. I'd seen him in the videos I'd watched before we came, so he really didn't need any introduction, but he introduced himself all the same. "Good morning, gentlemen." He spoke with a clear yet firm voice, as if every word he spoke was a command. "I hope you had yourselves a nice sleep last night, because today is the last of Asterisk King Day for the rest of the next month that you're gonna wake up without pain. In the coming weeks, each and every one of you will become intimately familiar with pain. You will be in pain every hour of every day from the moment you leave this mess hall until the moment you graduate the project. Pain is the greatest teacher you will ever have, because pain shows you who you truly are. It is through pain that you see where your limits lie, and it is through pain that you break them and build yourself up into who you need to become. My job is to keep you in constant asterisk king pain. So if you are not in asterisk king pain, then I'm not doing my fucking job. My name is Hunter Marquardt, but you will address me as Sergeant Hunter. Is that clear?" "Yes, Sergeant Hunter," came the reply. "Good. Now, you are all here because you made a choice. You've chosen to unlock your truest, fullest potential. I commend you for that, and I am here to guide you into unlocking your potential. But I cannot just give it to you. You need to take it for yourself. You need to earn it, and I will make you earn it. Through blood and sweat and tears, you will earn it. I am going to asterisk king rip you apart, and you are going to fucking thank me for it when all of this is said and done." I'd heard a lot of this opening speech before. It'd been part of some of the videos I'd seen online. I got the feeling I wasn't the only one who'd heard it before either. But while most of the other guys were hanging on to his every word like they were meeting a celebrity in person, I couldn't help but think that the whole thing felt a little canned. Like he was just going through the motions. Sergeant Hunter wasn't nearly as impressive in person as he seemed in those videos. There, he'd come across as this no-nonsense drill instructor, carrying himself with the energy of an angry pit bull. In person, he felt more like a grumpy substitute teacher who seemed almost comically small beside Lieutenant Chad and the other lieutenant in the room, whose name tag identified him as David. He put an arm on my shoulder, forcing me to move. I wasn't in any position to fight or to argue. I just let him take me. Keelan's screams echoed in my mind. I kept telling myself that maybe he could still get away. Maybe we could save him somehow. Maybe. I knew I was lying to myself. I knew he was dead. Asterisk. I was back in the cabin when Adam and the others returned. Apparently everyone had been called in due to the weather, despite the fact that the rain wasn't that heavy. Well, look who's back. Adam scoffed once he saw me. Where's Keelan? Jerking off. Leo teased. I glared at both of them. The look in my eye made Adam pause for a moment. Keelan's gone, I said softly. Something took him. I'm sorry. What do you mean something took him? Adam asked, eyes narrowing. He sat down on his bed, staring intently at me. There was an uncomfortable bitterness in his eyes. Leo and Matthew lounged on their own beds, listening intently. I saw it drag him up into the trees. I said, he was screaming, and screaming, and screaming until, well, he wasn't. Their eyes were trained on me. I could see the disbelief in them. You can ask Lieutenant Chad if you don't believe me. He saw it. He saw exactly what I saw. Leo and Matthew both looked to Adam, as if trying to gauge how they should react. Adam remained stoic. He just leaned forward, staring at nothing. He thought for a few moments before speaking again. Did it go after him specifically? What? I don't know. He was trying to call an Uber or something. I stepped away for a minute to talk to the lieutenant, and then we heard a scream. When we looked back, he was gone. Adam nodded. I see. So God's justice is done. I could only stare at him in disbelief. What? You said so yourself, Avery. Whatever you saw out there, it singled him out. It chose to take him. It waited until you'd left him alone, and then it disposed of him. I think the message is clear. What asterisk king message? I snapped. We all knew what kind of man Keelan really was. He pretended to be one of us, but I think we all saw the depravity in his heart. Sneaking off early every night, hiding his phone from us. And yes, I suspected he was hiding it. We all knew what he was doing. It was why he could never truly be one of us. You can't be a man of God and a supporter of sexual sin, pornography, fornication, adultery. It's all the same thing in God's eyes. Lust is a tool of the devil. There's no room for it in God's army. Seems Keelan's sin caught up with him, just as I said they would. He abandoned God, and see now how he has been abandoned. From where I sit, it's cut and dry. I'd never seen a person vomit up that much bullshit in one sitting before. Although Leo and Matthew just sat there, as if he'd just bestowed some kind of sagely wisdom upon them. Adam's cold blue eyes locked with mine. You, though, I think you've been given a second chance, Avery. Whether or not you waste it is up to you. Between you and me, I don't really care anymore. He left it at that. He didn't waste another word on me. And since then, all has been quiet. Leo, Matthew, and Adam have managed to find a couple of old board games to pass the time. Somehow Leo managed to talk them into playing Risk. None of them have really spoken to me, but that suits me fine. Right now, I'd rather be anywhere else than trapped in this King cabin with them. It's gotten dark outside. I keep glancing out the window. I can't see anything out there, but the darkness doesn't feel empty. I feel watched. Tomorrow, I might try and make it to the road. Maybe I can flag down a passing car. A no. Something in my gut tells me that I won't make it to the road if I try that. Whatever is out there, whatever killed Cody and Keelan, it doesn't want us to leave. I'll figure something else out. There's still cell phones in the office. Maybe I can still call for help. I'm not going to Asterisk King die out here, and I don't need God to save me. Where did you get that? He asked. Were you holding onto that the whole time? Who gives a fuck? I asked, but I'm not gonna just stand by and. Adam lunged at me, grabbing at the phone in my hand. I tried to keep it away from him, but he was stronger than I was. He dragged me down to the ground before slamming his fist into my face hard enough to leave me seeing stars. I couldn't help but gasp as I collapsed to the floor, fresh blood spewing from my newly broken nose. From the corner of my eye, I saw Keelan scrambling away from him, trying to put as much distance as possible between himself and Adam. I didn't see his phone in his hand anymore. He was at least smart enough to hide it when Adam came in. Unfortunately for me, my phone was ripped out of my hand, and Adam spiked it to the ground before crushing it under his foot, stomping down on it until the screen cracked and the frame warped. No, the word tumbled out of my mouth, but it did nothing to stop him. Adam kicked the broken phone back to me, a look of utter contempt on his face. What the asterisk is wrong with you? I cried, my mouth filling with blood from my nose. This is not just some fantasy, he said, his eyes wide and wild. Not to me. Life is war, Avery. Life is constant battle, and we are here to train. God called us here, Avery. We are here because God wills it. Each and every trial we face is a gift from Him. Don't you get it? That's why I wanted us here. We need to face the coming trials together. His eyes shifted to Keelan. Together, he repeated. And when we emerge victorious, we will be reforged into our truest selves. This is what he wants for us. This is what we need. I stared at Adam, and I knew in that moment that the kid I'd grown up with, the person I always saw as a friend, was long gone. I realized for the first time that I hadn't known Adam Yachimik in a long, long time. I'd pretended I did, but now that I was staring into the eyes of the person he'd become, I only saw a stranger. What about Cody? I asked bitterly. Cody was always a weak link, he said, his tone almost apologetic. God tested him, and he failed. But the rest of us won't. God won't let us fail. We are destined to be his warriors, and he will always guide our footsteps. Always. He looked between us, his usual mask of stoicism slipping back over the madness I glimpsed underneath. Let's get back on track, he said. Come on. I need you both for the trials ahead. Hugh, man. Keelan spat. I'm done with this shit. I'm getting the out of here. Adam's look soured. Then you're a coward, he said. Abandon God, and he will abandon you. Off. Keelan spat. Then without another word he pushed past Adam and stormed out of the cabin. Go on, run from him. Adam yelled after him. Run back to your king life of depravity, and when your sins catch up to you, I will not save you. His attention shifted to me next. And what about you? He asked. I just glared at him before quietly pushing past him and heading for the door. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't care to. I left. I expected Adam to yell after me too, but he didn't. He just watched as I followed Keelan out. The sky had been overcast all morning, but only now was it starting to rain. I could see Keelan up ahead, trudging past the hastily painted over sign and toward the grassy clearing where a few cars were parked. He stayed by the trees as he took out his phone, and I could see him fidgeting with it. He was still looking at it by the time I caught up with him. He looked up at me, and after a moment of thinking, he finally spoke. I'm calling a ride. I'll pay for half if I can come with, I replied. He just gave an exasperated half nod before leaning against a tree, still tapping away at his phone. Are you just calling a ride? I asked. He paused, looking up at me again. When we get the asterisk out of here, then I'm calling the cops. I wanted to argue with him about that, but maybe he had a point. It would have been easier if we were gone when the police arrived. Logically, I knew they probably wouldn't even think to question anyone about what had happened the other night. But that quiet fear still lingered in the back of my mind, and I knew it was in the back of Keelan's mind too. Keelan stared down at his phone. His usual lighthearted demeanor was completely gone. He looked tired and barely even resembled the Keelan I knew. Neither of us spoke for a while. We just sort of stood there and stewed. My mind shifted back to Cody. It was strange, thinking about him as dead. It was surreal equating the heavyset, baby-faced guy I'd known with the mangled remains we'd seen the other day. I'd never really known anybody who'd died before, and it just felt so odd thinking about how he was just gone now. He was gone, and nobody outside of our group knew it. Oh God, that thought turned my stomach a little. Shit, what are we gonna tell his mom? I said to myself. Keelan looked up at me. What? Cody's mom. I mean, he was really all she had, wasn't she? She wouldn't even know he's dead yet. I mean, should we call her, or? I'm gonna be honest, I don't fucking care, Keelan replied softly. What the hell? He was your friend. What the hell do you mean you don't? Was he? Keelan snapped. Think about it. Be honest with me. Are any of us really friends? We're Adam's friends, sure. But how do you actually *king like anyone else we hang around with? 'Cause to tell you the truth, I don't. I was silent for a moment. Keelan smoothed back his hair and sighed. I just hung around with Adam 'cause our parents were friends, and nobody really bothered me when I was hanging out with him. My parents liked him. I don't really know why, but it made me think that maybe there was something about him to look up to, and maybe it'd rub off on me if I stuck around with him long enough. Up until today, I didn't hate him, but he trailed off, unsure how to finish that thought. Everyone else, though. I tried, I guess. But Leo's probably the most insufferable, smug piece of shit I've ever met in my life. You can't even hold a conversation with Matthew, because he's got the emotional range of *king brick wall. Cody. Me. I wanted to like Cody, but did you ever sit down and actually try to have a conversation with the guy? He was *king loser. I'm sorry that he's dead. I am. But every time we were together, and Adam wasn't there to make him shut up, all he'd talk about was this weird incel shit. And you act like you're so above everyone else. Like we're all just annoying background noise to you. But you don't do shit for yourself. At least Adam, Leo, Matthew, and Cody actually bought into this place's bullshit. You only came here because Adam told you to. His words caught me off guard. I didn't really know how to respond to that. Keelan just stared at me, before shaking his head again. Guess I'm not any *king better. But I was hoping that maybe there'd be something here. I was hoping that maybe I'd finally find whatever I needed to make me more like Adam. Guess I kinda did. I should have seen the *king signs ages ago. Of course he's *king crazy. And I'm *king crazy for not noticing it years ago, when all of the red flags were right there. His breathing had gotten a little heavier. There was a faraway look in his eyes, and he went quiet for a moment before looking back down at his phone. Oh, what the fuck? He said under his breath. He looked back up at me. The fucking ride canceled. Too far from a pickup zone. What the hell? He went back to fidgeting with his phone, trying to get us some sort of ride, while I still struggled to think up some sort of retort what he just said about me. Before anything could come to mind, though, I noticed Lieutenant Chad coming over to us, carrying a pair of familiar plastic bins. Since Keelan was occupied, I went over to take them. Adam says you're checking out. he said. His tone was hard to read, but he didn't sound disappointed. Yeah, I said curtly. Sorry, it's just not for us. Hey, no worries, man. You made it longer than some guys have. Is one of these cars yours, or do you have some sort of ride coming? Keelan's taking care of it, I said. Chad nodded. All right. Well, if you guys want to wait in the office, I'll leave it unlocked for you. Or if you just want to avoid the other guys, I could unlock my car. I raised an eyebrow. Looked like you and your buddies had a pretty rough falling out. I get it, Chad said. I know how it goes. The car would be nice, I said. Chad just gave a nod and led me over toward an old rusted Ram 1500 that still had most of its blue paint left. He unlocked the door for me and I put our bins in the back seat. Thanks, I said. Look, it's been a shit show the last couple of days. I get it, he said. I don't even know if we're gonna end up finishing out the month. It's just... He trailed off before shaking his head, not wanting to say any more. He opened his mouth as if he was about to say something else, but in an instant I saw the look on his face change. What the fuck? I watched as he left my side to crouch beside the tires of his truck, tires which were completely deflated. What the fuck? He said again, circling around his truck. I followed him. All four of his tires were completely flat. Fuck, 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 he murmured under his breath. And that's when I finally noticed it. It wasn't just Chad's tires that were flat. All of the cars had flat tires. It was hard to notice through the tall grass around us, but every car's tires were completely flat. No, not flat. Slashed. I felt a sinking feeling in my chest as that realization dawned on me. Someone, had gone through and slashed the tires of every single car out there. I could suddenly feel eyes on me, coming from seemingly every direction at once. What the fuck? Chad had finally noticed the other cars as well. He stared out at them, a look of what I can only describe as utter bewilderment on his face as he tried to make sense of what he was looking at. And then the screaming started. Keelan. That scream. I've never heard that kind of terror in a human voice before. I spun around, just in time to see something dragging him up into the tree he'd been leaning against. I didn't get a good look at it. I only saw the long, spindly limbs with too many joints. Half of them wrapped around Keelan, holding him close while the rest dragged that thing back up into the foliage. For just a moment, I was reminded of a massive spider. But there was no way a spider could have ever grown that big. Not out here. Keelan's shrieks of terror still echoed in my ears. I remained frozen to the spot. Beside me, Chad went rigid, eyes almost popping out of his skull. For a moment, I expected him to move, to run toward the tree line as if he could somehow save Keelan. But he remained still. I'm not sure if he was paralyzed by fear, just like I was, or if he already knew that there was no saving him. That didn't make listening to his screams any easier. We just stood there, frozen, almost unable to process what had just happened as Keelan's bone-chilling screams echoed through the clearing. Then, all at once they stopped. Somehow the silence was worse. Neither Chad nor I spoke at first. For several seconds a tense silence hung between us. Every nerve in my body demanded that I run, but suddenly every tree was too close. The foliage was too thick. I still felt watched, and I kept envisioning countless spindly limbs emerging from the greenery to drag me away, just like they had Keelan. Cabins, Chad finally said, his voice cracking. His eyes were still wide with terror. Get back to the cabins.